Very good. Welcome to Pax Europiana. I'm very honored to have a very special guest this morning, Professor Krassen Stanchev, who is the leading mastermind of the Bulgarian economic reforms in the last 30 years, the president of the Institute for the Market Economy and professor for macroeconomics. I'm very honored that you take time this morning to discuss with us about the Bulgarian economic miracle. Please, Krassen, Professor, introduce yourself to the audience.
I'm not the only one. I'm not the only mastermind of reforms. Actually, Bulgaria did not have reformers of the stature of, say, Leszek Balcerowicz, with whom we are friends already 40 years, almost. No, 30 something, or Bendukidze, who passed away, a couple of years ago. But in Bulgaria, it was trial and error. I was drawn in politics after Chernobyl. Basically, I understood after Chernobyl. Then my wife was pregnant with our second daughter, and I understood that the regime is so anti-human that I cannot stay just as a lecturer at the economic university. I must do something. And I started dealing with environmental issues, big industrial complexes and their impact on the economy, and how the political system influences big industrial units like nuclear power stations and you name it. And then it was in '86, and I compared 3 Mile Island disaster and the Chernobyl disaster. And picture was totally different. Nothing anti-human on 3 Mile Island accident. It was '84, as far as I remember. And in comparison to Chernobyl, it was just a mess. So many people died just because of the system of decision-making, which is basically political setup of the old regime. And then I became very much politically active. So my background differs somewhat from many others, because being politically active on a seat at the Constitutional Assembly of Bulgaria in 1991, and I was the chairman of the Environment Committee and member of the Economic Committee. So as a chairman of the Environment Committee, the entire old industry, actually loss-making and polluting, came to my committee. So I had to study, post factum, what was the story of the previous 40 years in the Bulgarian industrial and economic system. And then, because of that position, I happened to know everybody on similar positions in Eastern Europe, from Leszek Balcerowicz to Mark Lahr. So we were basically the same group of people. It was a generation of '68. Not that we were born in '68, but in '68 we were sufficiently old to understand what was going on with the Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia. So that generation basically made a difference in all of our countries. I'm not very different from that generation. But my advantage was that I happened to know, my first advantage, I happened to know like-minded people from across Europe. And my second advantage was that it was an idea very old, before the first 3 elections, to have an independent economic think tank. So we've managed to realize this already after the elections in 1992. And between 1992 and 2010, I was very much a part of the global, think tank world. So because of this, I know most of the things like-minded think tanks and people were doing, not only in Europe, but also in the former Soviet Union. And of course, not only in the former Soviet Union, but also in South America, China, and other countries as well, just because of being part of that community. So that's my background, and I'm very happy of these two whatever distinct features of my background.
Professor, I'm very honored that you take time to discuss now on air here about Bulgarian economic reforms. Also, we can cover some other reforms in Central and Eastern Europe where you contributed a lot. But let me first take you back to the difficult years between 86 and 1990, as you mentioned, Chernobyl, and also about how was the legacy of industrialization in Bulgaria, what kind of inheritance left communism, how was the economic situation of Bulgaria in the year of transition when you joined the free world in the year 1990?
I will show a couple of slides comparing Bulgaria and Czech Republic, between mid 80s and 2020. But Bulgaria was somewhat different, from the rest of the communist camp. First, Poland's default on foreign debt was at the beginning of the 80s. This was one of the reasons to have a martial law in Poland. But the second country to default much later than Poland, actually in 87, de facto bankruptcy, not de facto default. Legally, Bulgaria defaulted in 1990. So, but Bulgaria is different from other countries by the fact that during these years, Bulgaria managed to default 3 times on its foreign debt. First 2 times, to the Central Bank of the Soviet Union, and of course, Comecon, Council of Mutual Economic Assistance banks in London. And third time, before the London Club of Creditors. The situation was very different from Poland because Poland defaulted, but Poland defaulted before the Paris Club of Public Lenders. So, which basically was easier for Poland to negotiate, although, the level of indebtedness was pretty similar between the 2 countries. And if somebody wants to have some sort of a contemporary comparison, the level of foreign government debt to GDP in Bulgaria and Poland was very similar to the Greek debt to the London Club of Private Lenders in 2009, which basically means 2 times GDP. Another thing which is very characteristic for Bulgaria, because it defaulted, of course, many countries defaulted after the World War I, but Bulgaria defaulted after more years in war, because Bulgaria was in war since 9/12. But then many countries defaulted in the beginning of the 30s. But Bulgaria managed to default in 1959-60, in 1976, and then de facto in 1987. So, and then Bulgaria managed to default once again, or Bulgarian government managed to default once again. It was already in the mid-90s. So the first years were, in order to pay the debts, Bulgaria in the 60s had transferred the entire gold reserves, which was relative to GDP, one of the largest gold reserves in the world. The gold reserves were transferred to Moscow in order to pay the debts, about 30 tons of gold. It was not enough, so Bulgaria had to seek closer relation with the Soviet Union economy in order to pay the debt, which led to some sort of political arrangement in 61. Then the communist leader sent Khrushchev a letter: please accept Bulgaria as a 16th republic of the Soviet Union.
Really? I didn't know that.
Luckily, there was the Caribbean crisis, evolving. And Khrushchev sent the cable back, just shut up. Look what is going on. So, and then Bulgarian, it was secret from the public. You know, we saw the archives, you know, already in the recent years. But then in '63, the Central Committee of the Communist Party again sent a letter to Khrushchev, you know, asking that Bulgaria is accepted as the 16th Republic of the Soviet Union. Then, you know, there was a second default in the 70s, again, you know, before the Central Bank of the Soviet Union. So, and the country was dealing with this defaults in the Communist Party, actually, not the country. The Communist Party was dealing with these defaults in a very strange manner. Number one was, of course, you know, getting closer in trade and integration, industrial integration, and everything else with the Soviet Union. But number two, they needed cash. They needed cash to pay the Soviet Union. What they did then in the beginning of the 60s, they started opening on taxpayers' expense trading and investment companies around the globe. And what they did, they were, of course, smuggling arms and drugs. So they were producing drugs or taking, you know, from the Soviet Union and sending it to North Vietnam, to Algeria. Actually, one of the companies, you know, was very instrumental in financing Algerian insurgent movement against France. You know, also that company started selling drugs because, I mean, especially synthetic drugs. So some drugs were like cocaine, others, you know, so they were sort of banned around the globe, but some synthetic drugs were allowed actually, and you know, the government sponsored the business. Gradually, those companies, because of other problems with paying foreign debt to the Soviet Union, those companies grew in number. By early 80s, Bulgaria had about 412 such companies around the globe. Next was the Czechoslovakia, because they needed, you know, a similar arrangement, and that's why they are very strong in producing explosives and now selling explosives. They're very good at that. But they had about 17 companies like this. So Bulgaria had 400, and the Soviet Union had 17 companies. 40 companies. So this structure was very important when the transition happened, not only in Bulgaria, but in all other countries. That meant that those who had an international experience in doing business were people associated with those companies. And these were not only the managers, but the entire structure behind them. And the structure was obviously sponsored and monitored and directed by KGB and the partners of KGB in our countries. So when 89 came, these people were the first with experience, with cash and knowledge how to operate globally. So this group of people, not only in Bulgaria, but in other countries as well, in general, you know, were the first beneficiaries of the market reform. And very often they were even leaders or insisted on market reforms. But because the group or the number of these companies in Bulgaria was bigger than in any other country, so Bulgaria was much more influenced by that group of people running the affairs on Bulgarian soil than in other countries. There are lots of interesting theoretical issues here, but just take the number of companies at the end of the 80s. So 400 companies, that basically meant that about 240,000 workers and their families were somehow associated with that group of people, which is a very strong electorate. And here is the major difference between Bulgaria and Central Europe. That group was very influential in steering the elections, the first 3 elections. So the reformist, anti-communist democratic camp did not emerge as a clear winner, like it was in Hungary, like it was in Czechoslovakia, or in Poland after Mazowiecki's government, especially the first presidential elections, which led to the election of Valensa as president. But originally, the situation was very similar. All of our countries, we had roundtables. On the roundtables, we agreed that we move with political liberalization, multi-party elections, and we fix the electoral system and some rules of the game in the political area. So the first years were, so we started our reforms. Actually, we were not inventing much, but nobody was inventing. So the key thing was 3 words: liberalize, liberalize, and liberalize. You liberalize, you liberalize the trade, you liberalize the business, you liberalize the labor market, you liberalize the banking system, the exchange rates, and the interest rates. That was these 5 things. And then you basically liberalize the ownership, or provide for private ownership or leading private sector in the economy, prevailing private sector in the economies, which happened before privatization everywhere. So privatization was a political process which took longer. In those years, Bulgaria had 2 distinguished features. Number 1, which is really unique, Bulgaria opted, and I was member of that committee in the Constitutional Assembly, Bulgaria opted for a very large scale of restitution of formerly confiscated properties in the end of the 40s. And we restituted land, we restituted forest, we restituted physical assets as they exist in the industry. We restituted financial assets, and we compensated former owners for assets or factories or economic units which were either destroyed or so much altered that it was not possible to restitute the rights in a physical sense. So it took a couple of years. Not everybody benefited, actually. There was a group which lost, but not because of not because of not having the right to restitute, but because their properties were expropriated very late in the 80s. So I will go into this because it was the second feature.
Professor, let me just ask the role of the red directors and the role of the communist industrialization. Were there a lot of these big companies left from the communist times? What was their status? And what was the role of these red directors in Bulgaria?
I will come to that. So the first feature was restituting everything, and it was very different. Poland did not manage to do so because of huge number of victims and exchanges of population during and after the World War II, and because of the fact that half of the country remained in the Soviet Union. Czechoslovakia did not manage to do so because they restituted their properties and that sort of, but they did not manage to go for such a large scale of restitution just because of the Sudetendeutsche, who were basically expelled after the World War II, and it was a huge number of people. So similar was the situation in Hungary. They opted, for compensation, not very large, but compensation for former owners, because one of the leading reformist parties was the party of small owners, which basically opposed large-scale restitution. And of course, in Hungarian, whatever background, that would have mean that many Austrian families will restore their properties in Austro-Hungary, which was not acceptable, for that small party. I'm not sure whether some of the other parties, the liberals or the socialists, and eventually Fidesz, the current party of Orban, they were not very much discussing these issues with the small owners party. So Bulgaria happened to be unique in this. So the second thing was that Bulgaria was, and here I will come to this red directors. The second peculiar feature of Bulgaria was that because of defaulting before before the Soviet Union, Bulgaria was much more integrated than any other country with the Soviet Union. So Bulgaria was trading in '89, it was an open economy, much more open than Switzerland, by the way, in terms of trade to GDP. But it was a trade with the wrong market. So Bulgaria was trading within Comecon 80% of its volume. So if you take Czechoslovakia, which was second after Bulgaria, but they were much less integrated trade-wise with the Comecon. They were trading with Comecon and the Soviet Union about 56% of their trade. And if you take Slovenia as an autonomous republic of ex-Yugoslavia, they were trading with Austria, Italy, and Germany on the first day of independence, which basically means 1991. They were already trading 62% of their volumes with these countries. So for Bulgaria, it took longer to reorient trade, from east to the west. And it was very important. Why? Because trading with poorer, you become poorer, which was the story with the Soviet Union after '89, and with Russia after the reforms of the beginning of the '90s. Russia was poorer than Bulgaria. All these post-Soviet republics, were poorer than our countries. The third feature is the red directors. The red directors, this is a misnomer. It's more the entire structure. So what they did, those who still had they were losing money, like hell. So as I said, the foreign debt default in the beginning in the middle of the 80s was because these companies were losing money, or their directors were simply stealing. So with the reforms, they had two options to go. Number one is to privatize assets they have abroad, which happened very easily with wine trading companies. Some of those, had a monopoly in some markets. For example, British wine seller in United Kingdom, share of 8% in the United Kingdom, which is a big market. So in the beginning of the 90s, it's 50 million market. So 8% of that market in wines was relatively good. So, but because they were afraid of rule of law, somebody will, because they had actually stolen the assets, they had the idea first to legalize the stealing of the assets of that company. Second, make very big cash as soon as possible. So they started selling, all what they have on stock for a very cheap price, and they destroyed the entire image of Bulgarian wines. So, but the one option in their strategy was legalize and sell, get huge cash as soon as possible. And number two, if they had some positions back in the country, to return with the capital accumulated abroad and start privatizing in Bulgaria. Of course, under the rule of law, it does not happen very fast. You need some rules of privatization, some rules of restitution. You need normal trade law, normal civic procedure code, and that sort of stuff. It does not happen very fast. So the second strategy of that group was just to stop privatization, which basically meant that between 1990 and 1996, the privatization was at standstill. So and of course, if you do this, you basically kick out foreigners, and you create. So you don't go, to the international market. Don't sell in transparent manner. You complicate the framework of privatizing, and you delay the openness of the capital market as long as possible, because privatization is it's an internationalization of the capital market. That's it. So, which happened, and the privatization was basically blocked with numerous very smart regulations. Bulgaria is I mean, that's probably the third feature. Bulgaria is the country with most complicated privatization process, and Bulgaria is the country which implemented all privatization schemes ever invented by economists. There is no single idea created somewhere in the economic area about privatization which was not implemented in Bulgaria. This was insiders, this was restitution, but several things were not used. For example, stock exchange was never used for privatization. So, because it's very transparent.
Professor, after the first year of openness in 91, then in 92 to 96 started a kind of backsliding phase, yeah? And that was also leading to 96, this breakdown and the changes. Why does this backsliding happen?
What we did at the beginning of 1990, this is to do this 5 types of liberalization as soon as possible, because Bulgaria is a smaller country than any of the former communist countries, and especially a smaller economy. Our positive effects came very fast. So we started this liberalization and price liberalization and that sort of stuff on 1st of February. We liberalized the
in 91.
Interest rates. In 91, sorry. In 91, on 1st of March 91. So the positive results, meaning the stabilization of the exchange rate, elimination of shortages, prevailing private sector in creating income for people, it was happening already in the summer of 91. So then we had elections, then we had another elections in 94. We had ex-socialist, ex-communists who were basically representing the interests of the directors. They came in charge because between 90, Bulgaria defaulted, and between 1991 and 94, successive Bulgarian governments, basically from the democratic camp, managed to reschedule the foreign debt. We made a history then in 94. The debt relief was 47% of the nominal value of the debt. So before Bulgaria, the greatest reduction of foreign debt was Latin American, but there was no country more than 35%. So Bulgaria managed 47. Poland, because of the Paris Club, managed to reduce 51%. And then there was no such history. Only only Iraq after 2003, and Greece after 2009 managed to have a greater rescheduling. Especially Greece. It made a history in the European Union. Anyway, the problem was, in order to maintain the ruling position of the so-called red directors, in 95, the socialist government, the ministers, as Minister of Economy, the Minister of Trade, they ordered state-owned enterprises not to pay their credits, loans to the banks, state-owned or private banks. By the way, Bulgaria was one of the countries to set up a private sector in the banking system very early. It happened before '89. It happened before the fall of the Berlin Wall. Between March and October '89, Bulgarian government, on taxpayers' money, created about 30 banks. So you take, money from the budget or from the state saving bank, where the population was keeping its accounts, give it to some private person, friend of the government, and they establish it. So you have a nice name, for example, First Private Bank. The public rushes there, to give them their savings, and then and then First Private Bank, because there is nobody else to finance, they extend credit to the public sector. So, and then in '95 comes the economic minister and orders, all the public sector enterprises in his domain, because he's a principal of, say, 10,000 enterprises. He orders all of them, not to pay, to the First Private Bank. So what happens to the First Private Bank, also Bank for Agricultural Credit, all with nice names, for example, Balkan name, Balkan Bank, with the idea to trade, with the Balkans. So what happened with all these banks, they suddenly, went bankrupt with the entire savings of the population, of course. So it was a crazy idea, but it was done. I have a research on this with Professor Alexandra of the economic school here in 96, 97, we did a research on it. And it happened that the key motivation of the socialist ex-communist government was not to stop privatization because of being afraid of people being laid out, unemployment, and that sort of stuff, because they had already taken a rate-free with a huge grace period, 20 years grace period, loan from the World Bank to pay the workers who had to be fired, who were envisaged to be fired. So what their problem was, and the first act of their government, their problem was, to please 700 members of the boards of the public sector or state-owned enterprises appointed by them. So the first act was to change the directors, to appoint their own directors, typically former ones, and then to fix their salaries. It was done in the first day of the meeting of the new cabinet at the end of January '95. So, and then because those new directors, they had to pay, the credits. They decided, that we'll order them because the government is the owner. So what happened, of course, is first, Bulgaria experienced between end of '95 and early '97 the most expensive banking crisis in the post-communist group of countries. So the the cost of the banking crisis was 42% of GDP of 96.
42.
42. Next, in terms of severity, was the banking crisis of Kyrgyzstan in 98. But it happened for totally different reasons. So, but the cost of the banking crisis was 38% of GDP. The reasons were the Russian government debt crisis in 98. And second, in 98, Kyrgyzstan became a member of the WTO. And immediately after, the neighboring countries, meaning Tajikistan, Russia, and Kazakhstan, they imposed 3 times higher tariff on everything coming, from Kyrgyzstan. So this immediately led to a huge default of banks, of course. So the next, in terms of costs, banking crisis was the Czech banking crisis of 98. Because of similar reasons. One of the reasons actually was very similar. Many Czech banks, some of them, or most of them, state-owned. They invested in Russian government bonds. And second thing, according to the Czech privatization law, the so-called mass privatization, the privatization funds, they were required to keep their accounts in the state banks. So, and when the new owners did not manage to perform, irrespectively how big was the investment fund and that's the privatization fund, so the entire hit was on the banking system. So, but the cost in the Czech Republic was 18% of GDP, which is 2.5 times cheaper than Bulgaria. So
it was terrible.
Of course, that was the severe banking crisis, very costly. About half of the banks, disappeared, including good ones. So, because, for example, First Private Bank was not a bad bank, eventually, because it was very popular with the people. Some of the state-owned banks, for example, Economic Bank, it was really very good bank, and I kept my personal accounts in that bank. So, some very good banks, half of them, 50% of the banks went bankrupt. The savings, the next effect is loss of savings, not just because of the bank bankruptcy, but also because of the hyperinflation, because hyperinflation was necessitated by the order to stop paying the credit. So then the central bank, what could have done is to recapitalize the bank, provide liquidity to the banks. And how they do it? Just printing money. So when printing money, the inflation goes up. So what the government reaction was, to start controlling the prices. So if by 91, actually from day one, from 91 February until mid 95, only 10% of the consumer basket was somehow controlled by the government, and it was natural gas, electricity, and some other prices. But that's it, water. So by the end of 95, 53% of the consumer basket were already controlled by the government price, which of course hit the private sector. So when it happened, what the government could do is just, again, print money. So if you look at the charts, now it's very good. It's not like 10, 20 years ago. It was very difficult to find a simple figure to compare things. But now, if you Googleize, for example, history of the inflation of the last 40 years, you will see how Bulgaria leads the charts of hyperinflation from the beginning of I know the dates, but it would be very boring, to even name the dates. So from Easter 96 to Easter 97, it was leading the global charts. Now it is Venezuela Then it was Bulgaria. So, and it led to the situation that for the entire 20th century, in this 11 months, Bulgaria reached the 17th place in terms of most severe hyperinflation in the world. So
terrible.
It was equal to Austria after the First World War. It was equal to Hungary after the Second World War, you know, and it was ahead of Russia after the October Revolution in terms of hyperinflation.
That is not a ranking you want to lead.
yeah. So Bulgaria is a good example how not to do things.
It's also important for economic policy. So it was basically a complete breakdown of the fiscal financial inflation.
Yes.
It was a disaster.
What happened when other countries were already emerging after the first reconstruction after 89, and it happened in 96. So Bulgaria actually went down. And that's the fourth or fifth already peculiarity of Bulgaria. So this is the only country which was doing the transition twice. So
and then in 96, it led to mass protest because people were quite unhappy, I can imagine.
Of course. I mean, in January 97, the inflation was 1,100%.
And this led to the election victory of the Union for Democratic Forces?
Yes. And we started everything again. So,
and then came the prime ministership.
Again, liberalize.
Oh, very good. Then came the prime ministership of Prime Minister Kostov, and major reforms were happening, especially here important, the so-called currency board of Bulgaria, which is now soon celebrating 25 years of enormous success and being the fundament of economic stability and growth of Bulgaria. Can you describe the process which led to this major reform?
Actually, Kostov was against the introduction of a currency board.
I didn't know that. No.
There is a need for fixing the exchange rate in order to maintain the debt restructuring deal with the IMF and the creditors. But he was believing in some sort of a temporary fixing the exchange rate and then returning, to some other central banking or monetary policies. So, in fact, it was the creditors, IMF, and independent economists, in the country. We were advocating, a currency board system from the beginning of the thing of the backsliding in 95.
With me, you mean you? You were one of the...
No, not only me.
But you were in favor of it.
The leading economists of the country were basically of the opinion that the only way to go is to repeat what Mises had done as an advisor to the government on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce in the beginning of the 20s in Austria. This is basically stop the printing press, introduce either a gold standard, but there was no gold. So, or fix the exchange rate and ban central bank, financing the government and financing the banks.
You refer to the famous Austrian economist, Mr. Mises, in the 20s.
Yes. But that was the idea which was somehow theoretically discussed at the beginning of, in 1990, the beginning of 1991, we were thinking of this in 91. Then we had guests from abroad, for example, Steve Henke, he was speaking about this in 94. So the idea was around just on theoretical basis. In 96, at the end of 96, we had presidential elections. And I was invited to sit on the advisory board, the Council of Economic Advisors of President Stoyanov. And I remember amidst hyperinflation in January 1997, the head of the central bank, the head of the Bulgarian Foreign Trade Bank, all the countries of the communist camp, they had these foreign trade banks, which was a good bank, because it was dealing in hard currency, so it was not affected by the domestic crisis. The Chambers of Commerce, the chairman of Chambers of Commerce, we were sitting with President Stoyanov and we were thinking what to do. And everybody was of the opinion that no currency board, just liberalize the exchange rate regime. Everything is illegal tender in Bulgaria. If you want to pay taxes in Mongolian tugriks, please, if you want to pay taxes or save in Swiss francs or Austrian shilling, please, we were for complete liberalization of the payment system. So then the politicians, they actually opted for the currency board, because when there is a currency board, the central bank, although it doesn't have the freedom of 100% monetary policy, but the central bank is an institution which stays there, for national pride, and politicians, they are very happy, to appoint the head of the central bank to discuss things, to discuss the exchange rate and that sort of stuff. So, but this was a political decision, to not to liberalize to the extreme.
So you were more for a total liberalization, and it was President Stoyanov who carried the day, basically, with the currency peg?
Yes, President Stoyanov, because of the early elections, by constitution, he had to appoint a caretaker government, and the caretaker government, working with IMF, actually one of the best central bankers of the 20th century, early this century, Warren Coates, on behalf of IMF, was responsible for reforming the central bank of Bulgaria. And then Bulgarian example was copied 1-to-1 in Bosnia and Herzegovina with the same team of people. Warren Coates, who drafted the Bulgarian central bank law and was overseeing the reform here, was responsible for the introduction of the convertibilna marka in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And he has a very interesting book on this. His book is One Currency for All.
Very good. I will check it out.
And it's available on internet. You can buy, or people can buy, or can read it, because it was published, I think, about 20 years ago.
A similar situation was done in Macedonia, also with a currency peg.
Yes.
And also Kosovo and Montenegro have adopted the euro. So it's a kind of hard currency bloc in the Balkans, which was built on the leadership of Bulgaria 25 years ago.
Yeah, but in Macedonia, most of the ex-Yugoslav economies who were interested in Macedonia, including those who work for Vienna Institute for International Wirtschaftsvergleiche, even they opted, for some, they were sort of advising for some sort of a currency board or quasi-currency board central banking or monetary policies of most of the ex-Yugoslav countries.
We in Austria, we have always had the so-called hard shilling policy, which was connecting first to the dollar after Second World War, and later in 1974, we connected to the German mark after the end of Bretton Woods. And we thought in Austria, always all the economists basically, that this hard shilling policy was very good. And I guess maybe Austria and Bulgaria and Macedonia have adopted some. Professor,
no, but it was a good experience already in other countries. So, in fact, almost simultaneously, but before us, was Lithuania. Before Lithuania, there was Estonia. They did not do it because of good life or being very smart. Simply they did not have any other option. After leaving the former Soviet Union, and you have the ruble, the Russian ruble, as a major currency in the country, what you would do? Now, the most stupid thing would have been, like Belarus, to keep the ruble. So the only thing they could have done is opt for a currency board and complete liberalization of everything, including flat tax like Estonia.
Professor, next year it will be 25 years of the currency board in Bulgaria. Is there any kind of anniversary or celebration planned?
Yes, at least my students, my assistant professor, who is the chairman of the Bulgarian Libertarian Society, and he is also involved with economic club of experts in politics. So they are planning, the anniversary.
Very good.
I believe central bank governors, some of them, actually one of them who sits in ECB and who is the head of the emission, who is the actual head of the currency board, they will central bank will organize an event on this. So at the same time, Bulgaria, along with Croatia, last year in July was accepted in the ERM2, the waiting room for the euro.
Congratulations.
And Bulgaria is doing much better than I mean, on economic criteria, Bulgaria is doing better than Croatia. Of government debt, budget deficits, everything else, inflation, and so on and so forth. But there is one peculiar requirement for Bulgaria, which basically refers to what we have been talking about. So the Bulgarian requirement is that the country should ensure the rule of law, fight corruption and organized crime.
That's for all countries absolutely important. But Professor, let me ask Prime Minister Kostov in this starting year, because the currency board was the fundament of the economic miracle of Bulgaria. But Prime Minister Kostov and this government of UDF in '97, they started what I call the Bulgarian economic miracle. One of the pillars was the currency peg, but then also was restitution, privatization, and property rights, which you already referred to. But it was a really, I think, a unique effort for restitution, which deserves international applause. This effort which was done, and also the consequent privatization of land and all these efforts. I think no other country in Eastern Europe has gone so far, so clear, so good. And please, can you refer to that and also describe the context? It was certainly complicated to restitute everything.
Not very much, actually. First, it had the approval of the general public. Designing the arguments in favor, we did with a colleague of mine. He is now, I think, chief economist of UNDP, for Europe. We did a research, and it happened that voters of all political parties were supporting privatization and restitution. Even voters of the ex-Communist Party, more than half of them supported restitution. Voters for the Democratic parties, they were like 60 to 70% in support for restitution and privatization. The reason was why, and the explanation was very simple. Because even those who were members of the Communist Party, or those who were voting for them, they had something to restitute. It's very simple. So a restitution of physical assets was basically over by 97, 98. What was the challenge for Kostov's government was the restitution of forest and restitution of financial assets. Of course, there were other things, which were heavy in terms of procedure. For example, one of the original laws, we did not know the background very well, but one of the original restitution laws of 92, it was restituting the properties confiscated after 1944, when the Soviet troops came here. But it happened that it doesn't go into the restitution of the properties of Bulgarian Jews. Bulgarian Jews were expropriated in 1939 because Bulgaria, as an ally of Germany, they adopted, very similar anti-Jewish laws. So then, there was refixing of the restitution process and the restitution laws, and by 95, it was possible to restitute everything, irrespectively, when you become an owner. So there are still, cases where people are trying to restitute properties, from the Ottoman times. So, of course, it is not very easy because, the time passed. And then, because of several wars in the Balkans, there were many international arrangements which limited, the opportunities, to properties. But this was not only a Bulgarian case, similar was the case with Greece. But the key thing in Greece at the beginning of the 20th century was that Greece never expropriated Ottoman subjects, be they Turks or anybody else. They kept the property rights of those who were legitimately owning assets in independent Greece. And it was the story until the Balkan Wars and early 1920s. So the property rights were kept. So this respect for property rights is very common in the Balkans, which is, in my point of view, very different, from ex-Soviet Union, for many reasons, and not all parts of the Soviet Union, lack this history of property rights because of the October Revolution and everything which happened after. But some part of Russia, for example, Caucasus, all the Caucasus autonomous republics, they still have a memory. I have been working there on behalf of the World Bank like 15 years ago. And I witnessed how people know who owns that part of the forest, who owns that part of the field, and that sort of stuff. People were basically with a good memory, a good record. It was verbal. It was not notary deeds because all the notary deeds were lost. But the memory was there.
But it's quite extraordinary. Bulgaria reinstating the 44 property rights fully, completely, and it's something to congratulate and celebrate. I think it's a global achievement.
Yeah, the privatization scheme was. I told you that privatization was the most complicated in terms of legal schemes and that sort of stuff. But one thing remained unchanged from the beginning of the 90s until 2004, when the privatization law was sort of repealed, and then new privatization law was installed, and the privatization stopped. But from 1992 until 2004, the rule was that 20% of the assets of a privatized enterprise, of a privatizing enterprise, are kept for the insiders. 10% of the assets are kept for those who have rights to restitute, and that 70% is to be sought. So the restitution interest was preserved from very beginning, as well the interest of those who were working in the enterprise.
How successful was the process of privatization of companies during this phase of Prime Minister Kostov?
In my point of view, it was very successful, but like everywhere, privatization was a politically acceptable process of liquidation of loss-making government industries. So the entire political process of privatization everywhere, not only in Bulgaria, was an effort to take state-owned assets out of the hands of the government bureaucrats. It was very important. So even dubious schemes, without transparent procedures and that sort of stuff, even they produced a very good outcome eventually. Really, I mean, privatization everywhere was a success, irrespectively how difficult was the process and irrespectively how morally unacceptable it could have been. For example, in Bulgaria, and the rule was the smaller the asset to be privatized, the more open the procedure. If you privatize a shop, you have a tender. If you privatize an enterprise which is hundreds of millions of turnover, you have a negotiation with strategic buyers. So the bigger the enterprise, the more negotiations. And then there was another rule. For example, and this is statistics for the entire process of privatization. For municipal enterprises to be privatized, the new owners or candidates to own it, they would have 5 working days to see the enterprise. For ministerial, whatever, own enterprises, I mean, enterprises which were with principals, some of the ministries, the period to see the enterprise was about 14 working days. And for bigger enterprises, it was 27 working days. So it's impossible. So, I mean, even that, so the fastest was the best. I have a friend who privatized a furniture factory. He paid about 200,000 D-marks for the enterprise. And it was in a very bad shape. So it happened that on stock, he had boats. He managed to sell, for 240,000 D-marks. So, but nobody knew that those boats were there. Boats. Because like everywhere else, the process of planning was 5 years. So in all of our countries, there was a requirement that you have on stock all the supplies for the 5-year plan. So, and most of those things did not have any value, but some of those, they had a value. So you could have sell it for scrap, for example, but it still had some value. And these things were basically unknown. Although there was a very complicated process of assessment and that sort of stuff, Actually, the assessment of the assets was one of the reasons to delay privatization everywhere, not only in Bulgaria. So,
Professor, this was the years of Prime Minister Kostov. We are now coming to the year 99. This was a very important year for Europe. There was the first NATO enlargement with Poland, with Czech Republic, with Hungary, and also it was the Kosovo War. And obviously that has, because Bulgaria is a neighbor of Serbia, it had a big effect, I guess. What was the effect of the Kosovo War on Bulgaria economically?
Zero. Rather positive, actually. So if you look at the war statistics, of the year of the war statistics, this was like 2 times growth of exports. Why? because first, Bulgaria became a route, to avoid ex-Yugoslavia, Serbia, and even Macedonia, because people were afraid because of the refugees in Macedonia. So the cargo traffic, was rechanneled through Bulgaria and Romania. And second, all the supplies of crude oil had stopped for the refineries in Serbia. So the only supply was of crude oil and coal for the thermal power stations was coming from Bulgaria. So, in fact, economically, the 98, 99 was very good. Actually, there was an embargo, of course, on Serbia, but Prime Minister Kostov managed to argue with NATO and the European Union and prove his thesis that irrespectively the conflict situation, this is not reasonable to hurt the people of Serbia. It is better to have the economy having its basic supplies, be it crude oil, coal, and some others, in order not to hit the general public, and second, to have a normal political and economic process afterwards. Because if there is another crisis, you will have probably another dictator or the same dictator for another term elected. So that was his position on this, and I believe he was right.
There was also the presidential visit of the American president to Bulgaria then in '99. That was also leading, many people say, to NATO membership of Bulgaria later then. And how you assess also, then we come to the next phase, basically, 2001, the prime minister of the royal family of the former Saxon-Coburg family became prime minister, and all this accession and very good period, I think, economically, from 2004 NATO membership, 2007 EU membership. What was the economic situation and the reform progress?
After 98, after second start of reform, second start of liberalization, Kostov's government, until present day, this is the longest period of economic growth in the entire Bulgarian history. And this is not only the longest, but it is also the fastest, especially the first years. So this is because of the, of course, very low starting point, because of hyperinflation and that sort of stuff. But since 1878 until today, this is the longest period of economic growth in Bulgaria, the longest period of personal prosperity. If you look at the assets of people, if you look at the income, if you look at all the criteria, I will probably have time, to name some figures and show some slides. So, but this is the longest period. Second thing, which was very important, Bulgaria managed to qualify in 98, 99, like all of the new member states, for a European Union membership. So we started negotiation along with Poland, Hungary, Slovak, Czech Republic, and everybody else in 99, which of course led to a good prospects for investment, of course, economic growth. You've mentioned Prime Minister Saxon-Burgoski, or the King, King Simeon. So he was elected in 2001. Between 2002 and 2008, Bulgaria was the prime foreign investment destination in the world. The only country which was better was Hong Kong, but of China.
That's an achievement.
So there were years I mean, the measurement is absolutely reliable because this is the amount of foreign investment relative to GDP. So, and in some years, the foreign investment was as high as 30% of GDP. The average foreign investment for the period between 2004 and 2008, I will explain why 2004, was 23% of GDP per annum.
22%, wow.
Which basically meant that basically every new investment in the country, every new euro of income was somehow related to foreign direct investment. In 2007, 2008, the weight of the foreign investment in the fixed capital formation of Bulgaria was 93%. So the new investment in the country, almost 100% of it was foreign direct investment. And as I said, it happened after 2004. Why 2004 was important? Because first people saw that the EU membership track is certain. Second, there was a sound money because of the currency board. But most importantly, in 2004, Bulgaria had become a member of NATO. So which basically means that whatever they do there in that whatever middle of the Norway in the Balkans, they will not expropriate, there will be a rule of law.
That was a major achievement, obviously, to be part of the Transatlantic Alliance and NATO.
Yes, I think that this needs to be repeated in other countries. I'm very happy that Macedonia got the invitation for NATO membership. And I'm absolutely disappointed by the role of the Bulgarian government blocking the accession of, at least the accession negotiations for the time being, of Macedonia and Albania, because they go you block Macedonia, you immediately block Albania, which is totally irresponsible behavior.
You have a lot of trade links with Macedonia?
Macedonia is more important than Russia for Bulgaria. Not because of any sentiment, but because of export. So if you look at the export, Bulgarian export to Macedonia, which is 2.5 million, is larger than the Bulgarian export to Russia, which is 140 million. So actually,
so why is Bulgaria
the income? I mean, for those who are not economists and listening to us, the export, this is part of the well-being of an economy, because this is foreigners buying stuff created in a given country. So Macedonia is much more important for Bulgarian incomes than Russia. Russia is actually a cost, because you pay for natural gas and petrol.
Do you think economically it would be very beneficial for Bulgaria if North Macedonia would come faster to the European Union?
Of course. It will be beneficial from all the standpoints, including, stupid Bulgarian and Macedonian historians, they will be happy, in fact, the accession to any international organization, be it WTO, be it NATO, be it European Union, or anything else, is about the future, not about the past. So linking all this with the past is crazy. It was crazy to be done by the Greek political parties for many years against Macedonia, and it was irresponsible behavior on behalf of Bulgarian political parties who were running the country in the last couple of years. So
Macedonia and Bulgaria have a very interesting similarity. They have the same very good tax system of 10% in corporate and income. Professor, let me ask you, in 2007, it was already 10 years economic miracle, and then Bulgaria decided to introduce the flat tax of 10%. How did that happen, and why did you do it, and was it successful for the Bulgarian economy?
Okay, so in fact, the idea was the idea of such a reform was a pure private initiative. You know, on Bulgarian side, it was the Institute of Market Economics. On Polish side, with hidden sponsorship on behalf of famous economists like Balcerowicz, and not only, was the Institute for Private Enterprise and Democracy in Warsaw, which is an attachment to the Chamber of Commerce. And in Slovakia, it was the Institute for Liberal Democratic Studies. So in '97, already witnessing what's going on with the EU accession and that sort of stuff, stabilization in Bulgaria, we started a campaign to join the countries, to join the countries into the European Union. But before that, reform the tax system in order to have advantages, you know, and fast growth and equalization of incomes and that sort of stuff between our countries and the European Union. That was the basic philosophic idea. What happened was that when in '98 we did the research, we did the polling. We asked the public, we asked the chambers, you know, it was done, you know, a proper research. What happened in Bulgaria, that Bulgarian businesses did not want to have a flat tax.
What?
Businesses, yeah, they wanted to be somehow in the privileges, you know, not so much, you know, to be competitive. They wanted to have a sponsored competitiveness. Actually, 37% of Bulgarian enterprises, private ones, they were against the flat tax. Only about 15–20%, you know, were in favor. So in Slovakia, most of the enterprises were in favor, but the political system, the country was run by President Mečiar. They almost had beaten Jan Orovec, you know, who was advocating this in the financial committee. We had a conference with them in the financial committee in the parliament. He was almost beaten in the parliament because of addressing. Jan said, you know, okay, you just forget about this, whatever public discussions. We will create a taxpayers union, and the taxpayers union will convince you, members of parliament, to adopt the flat tax system. Mieczysław Bąk, the head of the institute in Warsaw, you know, he resigned from the idea because Balcerowicz had stepped down. You know, he resigned as a finance minister, and there was no political sponsor, so to say. And as a huge membership-based organization, the Chamber of Commerce, you know, decided that it's too risky, you know, to argue with all the whatever parties in the parliament. So they resigned. So I returned to Bulgaria, and I said, okay, we will be doing the same like in Slovakia. Like Jan Orovec, we will create a taxpayers union, and we will advocate flat tax. I was very stupid, and I told this, you know, it was a radio talk show or something, and I told this, you know, I announced this. So in a week, we had 3 taxpayers unions registered by financial advisors, by the financial advisors of the finance minister. So they
competition for this idea.
The only thing we could do is to start drafting an alternative budget to the drafts of the annual drafts of the budget drafts of the government, but already with a flat tax of 10%. So, and we were doing this. We are doing this already on the institute. I left it it already, in my point of view, 18 years in a row, we do this alternative to the government calculation of we compile a budget. In technical terms, it looks like the government budget. So, and we were doing this, 6 years in a row, with alternative to the government budget, with 10% flat and not cutting at all the social expenditure, social aid and other things. So, and we were basically always right, so that, and eventually we managed to convince everyone. So, and all the political parties, they opted, it was an agreement between a very complicated coalition of 2007, 2008. But because it was the King's party, King Simeon's party, which insisted on this, and the other party which insisted on this was Movement for Rights and Freedoms. This is the party Bulgarian Muslims vote for. But they were, because they are true to their electorate interest, and they wanted Bulgarian Turks and Bulgarian Gypsies are somewhat poorer than the majority of the country's citizens. So in order to increase their disposable income, the Movement for Rights and Freedoms insisted all the time on simple and low flat proportional taxation. So you've mentioned Macedonia. The deputy minister and then the finance minister of Macedonia, he came to Bulgaria to study how we are doing this. And he came exactly at the time we did the research on what should be the rate. So, and we had a very different approach from Jan Orovec in or Taxpayers Union of Slovakia. What we did, we took the actual amount of taxes collected from companies and individuals, and we compared this with the amount which is due to be collected according to the law. And it happened that the tax collection was 12.9%. So how you do that then the reform? You simply fix it at the level which is acceptable to the public, and that's why we came with an idea of 10%. Macedonian situation was Trajkoslavski did the same research, and the situation was very similar to ours, which was not the approach with the things in Slovakia, and this eventually led to complications, and they abolished the flat tax system. I think in 2015. So they opted for 19% because they wanted to have it flat with the VAT as well. They had a couple of thresholds for VAT, and they decided they unified the thresholds and they fixed it at 19%. So, and this was their argument to have the income taxes, corporate and private, individual income, to fix it at 19%, which was a mistake in my point of view. They could have calculated, what is the, plus their system is with minimum tax-free amount, which is changed every year. So the government calculates, the survival rate, whatever does it mean, I don't know. But when they adopted the 19% flat tax, the survival rate was €76 a month. So when they abolish it, the survival rate was about €360 a month. So. This tax exemption of the minimum wage served a very bad job in Slovakia. Our system is without exemption. So you earn €1, you pay 10%. You earn, 1,000 euro, you pay 10%. So everybody is equal. So which basically lead to an incentive of low wage earners to go into the higher brackets. And if you look at the statistics, you ask me now what was the performance of the budget. So the performance of the budget is very simple. It was introduced 2007 for companies. The income, or the revenue went up about 20%. When it was introduced for the personal income, the revenue went up about 25-30%. And since then, for personal income, it stays there. It stays there and grows up. It never went down, even during the recession years of 2008, 2009. So the revenue on personal income, it had been always. Why? Because the number of people who are moving into the higher brackets of payment, they have the incentive and they really do so. And this is the story, for already, 13 years. Another story here is Credit Suisse. They publish annual reports on wealth of nations. This is the assets in a country, including private assets, including homes, cars, other things, savings. Between 2000 and 2019, this is the latest data available. 2020, the report is there, but just the summary. The data bank is not yet published by Credit Suisse. So if you compare Bulgaria with other countries of our camp, but not only, between 2000 and 2019, the personal wealth of the country went up 1,100%, 11 times. There is no other country.
11 times more personal wealth per person in Bulgaria.
Yeah, per adult. I mean, the calculation, you have GDP, you have savings, you have real estate, you have industrial assets, which are part of real estate, and you have other assets, financial instruments, whatever, per adult. Of course, currently per adult, it's about 44,000 euro per person, which is not that well like Austria. Austria would have 247,000 per person. But Austria did not experience much of a communism, just mild socialism.
The Americans have liberated us in 45 mostly, yes. And the Soviets left 10 years later. So it's quite a different, but it's amazing. 10 times increase of the wealth of individuals in Bulgaria in just 1 decade. It's unbelievable. It's amazing.
And if you look at 2 decades, but if you look at the years where the difference came about, these are the years of the introduction of the flat tax. Why? Because the disposable income of individuals and companies, was already there and at their discretion.
Professor, then most people will think that Bulgaria must be a highly indebted country with a huge debt to GDP ratio because you have such a low tax rate. Is that true?
So according to the data from yesterday, the lowest government debt to GDP ratio is Luxembourg, which is about 22%. Then comes Estonia with 23-24%, and then comes Bulgaria with 25%. There is not much difference between Bulgaria, Luxembourg, and Estonia.
You have only 25%.
25%.
And just as a reminder, Greece is now where?
It should be 189.
Wow, it's quite a difference. Yeah. So Bulgaria only 25%, and even today, and with all the other shocks, it's quite an achievement. Congratulations. Let me ask you about the great financial crisis, because after the introduction of the flat tax in 2007-8 came the great financial crisis for everybody in the world, the big shock of September 2008. Yeah? Do you think that the situation, the economic policy of Bulgaria with the currency peg and the flat tax has helped to soften the blow of the great financial crisis?
Yes, absolutely. Plus some luck.
But what was the effect of the great financial crisis in Bulgaria?
The currency remained stable. The economy went down almost 5% in 2009. But the major reason was not so much the financial crisis or the global recession. The major reason was that the largest enterprise in the country, with a share of, say, 5 to 7% of GDP, if you take the turnover of the enterprise and relative to GDP, it was about 7%. It was really huge enterprise with about 420 suppliers, and with the railways, the gas monopoly, the National Electric Company, and that sort of stuff. They were hit, by the bankruptcy of that enterprise too. So, of those 5% decline of GDP of 2009, roughly 2/3 of it is just that bankruptcy of that enterprise.
What was the name of the enterprise?
Kremikov steel smelter.
So it was one steel smelter.
It's one of the enterprises. Why history is important? It is one of the enterprises which was built on Soviet technology in the middle of the 60s. When Bulgaria defaulted before the Soviet Union, they needed to integrate with the Soviet Union to prove, they will, for example, recycle their iron ore, build machines and that sort of stuff, have Soviet investment. And that enterprise was built near Sofia with no local, reason to do this, because the iron ore near Sofia was 3 to 4 times poorer in terms of iron content than, for example, iron from Ukraine. So then there is no port in Sofia. There are ports on the Black Sea. If you import iron ore, you better do it there or on Danube. It was totally irrational. I remember I was a boy then. I was probably 10 years old. And I remember at home, my father and the engineer who was doing the impact assessment, so to say, of the project, who is Bulgarian, but with German education in mining and engineering. And I remember my father and Uncle Todor, they were discussing this. And I knew, as a boy, that it is irrational, to build this enterprise there. But nevertheless, they had built it, and they invited that friend of my father, to be an executive director. So, and he managed somehow, with all these international arrangements, subsidized resources and other things, he managed to maintain the enterprise for quite a long period. But eventually, it was existing in the greenhouse of Comecon. It was not possible that enterprise will survive, in an open market, which eventually was the situation. Already privatized, it went bankrupt. And of representing the creditors in the time of bankruptcy of that enterprise.
What's the situation now of that company?
It's totally dismantled, sold on scrap. There are still some assets that can be used. This is an investment done in 2007, but it was not used because the bankruptcy happened in 2009. These are, one should be a specialist to understand, but this is the cold rolling sub-factory of that enterprise, which is intact and which is a new investment. The investment actually, the machines were supplied by Fjorstorpine, and their state-of-the-art, technology, which is clean and can be used. So it might be used. I mean, if not, they can build a nice neighborhood over there.
So the biggest crisis of the great financial crisis was actually this bankruptcy of that steel company in 2008.
Yeah.
So you were lucky to somehow escape with your good economic...
And I said, there was some luck, but the currency board did a very good job, because there was no temptation or no option that the central bank finances, some of the government, whatever ideas or expenditures. And the second thing, which was very important, was the flat tax. So the corporate tax revenue was affected because of the business cycle. That's normal. But the private segment, it stayed there, and it was growing, not that much, but from 2008 to 2009 and to 2010, the growth of the revenue from personal income tax was about 7-8% compared to the previous year. And then it went, into double digits, as it was before.
In 2011 started the so-called Greek debt crisis, and you are obviously a neighbor of Greece, and you have certainly strong economic links with Greece. So what was the effect of the Greek debt crisis on the Bulgarian economy?
Not only Bulgaria, but all the Balkans benefited. First, there was a flight capital. Flight capital was really huge. So it was about 30% of GDP, 30% of Greek GDP. Mm-hmm. And most of these things, assets, they went to other Balkan countries and to Cyprus. But Cyprus, it enjoyed, its own banking crisis, So the Greeks, started thinking of moving their assets, or personal even saving accounts, to neighboring countries, except for Turkey. So Macedonia, Serbia, Bulgaria, but most of all Bulgaria, because it's a neighbor which is a member of NATO and which is a member of the EU, but also because the Greek banks in Bulgarian banking system had controlled about 24% of the savings and 26% of the credit portfolio. So, because this is not Deutsche Bank or Crédit Agricole financing, the Greek government. These are Greek banks financing Bulgarian private subjects. So the Greek banks had all the interest that Bulgarian private subjects are doing very well, to pay the debts. So they behaved really very well. These were the best banks, for a very long period. Eventually, because their owners were privatized by their own creditors, be this whatever, whatever, or Commerzbank or whatever, you name it. So the new owners, they privatized, they sold some of the formerly Greek banks in Bulgaria. One of them became Canadian, which is okay. One of them was bought by an Austrian group, which is Italian, so it's basically normal. And there is only one Greek bank, actually. Actually, it's mixed ownership, it's American Greek, which is relatively large today in Bulgaria. But, the Greek investment in 2012 in Bulgaria was about 2% of GDP. In 2013 as well, 2% of GDP. So in 2011 and 2010, about 60,000 Greeks per annum were opening their bank accounts in Bulgaria.
60,000.
60,000. This would have been small sums, of course, whatever they had, but it supported the banking industry in Bulgaria.
So Bulgaria became a safe haven during the Greek financial crisis and the investment destination for
Not
Greek.
only Bulgaria, that was the same situation was in Macedonia, the same was in Serbia, with the difference that in Bulgaria, the Greek banks were local legal entities. So in Greece, in Macedonia and Serbia, they were branches. So they had the same interest of having the local economy intact and their clients, being well and kicking. But eventually they were branches. And because they were branches, very often their profits were immediately transferred to the homeland, and eventually, to the creditors of the mother banks. So, which in Bulgaria was not the case. As local branches, they were subject to regulation by the central bank. During the crisis, the regulation of the central bank was really very good, Bulgarian central bank. First, what they did is that they increased the minimum reserve requirements, foreseeing the global crisis. Bulgarian minimum reserve requirements for the banking industry were 3 times higher than average for the European Union before the crisis. So there was a cushion of reserves in the banks, to meet any eventualities. And another thing which they did, I believe it was just by chance. When you look at, and currency board provides for very transparent central bank. You basically see every penny. So what happened? There were bonds of a value of about $2 billion by the statistics of that year. It would have been 3.5–4% of GDP, and these were dollar-denominated bonds issued by Lehman Brothers. So, for some reason, I don't know what, there are different rumors. I asked people. For some reason, couple of months before before the crisis hit, they have sold those bonds, because I think, the finance ministry needed, $2 billion, and the central bank sold, converted part of it in euros, and gave some cash, to the finance ministry. It was in the reserves of the finance ministry, actually, with the central bank. It was not an asset of the central bank.
Professor, Prime Minister Mitsotakis has last week announced a tax reduction from 24% corporate tax to 22%. And also they have a progressive taxation system. What's your take? Would the Greek economy and also the Bulgarian economy benefit from a more courageous and lower tax system by Greece? And what's your recommendation? What is the right tax level?
The problem of Prime Minister Mitsotakis is that his steps, beside the story with the foreign debt, his steps in the tax policy in the public finance area are very closely monitored by the creditors and by the IMF. Nobody will allow them, to have a more radical approach. What he's trying to do is obviously reasonable, but for the Greeks, it's more important that they reduce taxes on houses, which is the most ridiculous system in the world. So they're calculated every year, and it is paid every year as a percentage of the price of the house on the market. for this reason, they have the most expensive costs of housing in Europe. It's about 40% of the price of the house because of this taxation they have. Next is Bulgaria, and that's why I know. Bulgaria is about 10%. They also have another problem, and that problem is the tax foreigners pay. That tax is VAT, and especially in tourist areas. So the system is very complicated. I would have gone with a plan reducing every year by 1%. So, for example, 22, next year 21, then next year 20, the year after next, 19, and see how the system reacts. But again, the complexity in Greece comes, from the totally complex system, the progressive taxation, about 5 different rates in VAT, plus the real estate tax, which is very complex and unreasonable in my point. So,
Professor, let me ask you about the property miracle of Bulgaria, because you're also a very beautiful country, similar like Greece, with a great coast. And you have, and that's quite extraordinary, I don't know any country like this, you have attracted over 300,000 international property buyers who are buying apartments either in ski resorts or in the coast or in Sofia. That's kind of an unprecedented miracle of international investment promotion on the individual level, for families, for people who want to spend holidays. How did that happen, and how did you make that?
First, this is because of the restitution of land and forest. Second, the economic boom, the overall economic boom happened after the hyperinflation and very deep decline. Very deep decline means in January 97, the average salary, real, was about $40. The average pension was about $20. In February 97, the average salary in industries was $20, and average pension was $5. So after the crisis, after fixing, the liberalizing for the second time and that sort of stuff, after seeing the end of the tunnel, not the light, but the end. So the public did not have much of a choice, but converting, the assets they had in real estate into something like cash or some other business. So this immediately led to building hotels, residential houses, and vast areas, around the sea, and mountain resorts were built and successfully sold until the crisis hit. So. But at the moment, there is a revival of even the assets which were frozen. I mean, real estate which were frozen are currently in use. Of course, last year was a strange year, but still, the housing market is up, including in these areas. So the housing market in the last 5 years had grown like 17%, I think, in the last 5 years. And there is a growth in 2020 as well.
Congratulations.
Which is normal. You have a recession and people with money, they don't know what to do, So
This global recession hit everybody the same, Corona and the great financial crisis. Let me ask you about 2009, because from 2009, Prime Minister Boris Borisov is dominating the political scene, and it is now a phase of EU membership already. And there was a major infrastructure drive, built a lot of modern infrastructure, and it has changed the shape of Bulgaria positively, I think. How much was done, and what's your perspective on this Borisov's infrastructure drive?
Actually, this is a remnant from the past as well, you know, from the crisis of 76. Bulgaria, along with Yugoslavia, started building its road network somewhere in the 70s. But there was a foreign debt crisis of 76, so the entire infrastructure construction was stopped and never resumed. You know, it was not possible, you know, in the 80s, it was not possible in the 90s. So then some of the things were finished, you know, between 2000 and 2009. And then the only obvious thing, you know, the government could have done, you know, in order to boost the economy after the 2008-2009 recession, was some infrastructure, and it was a reasonable thing, you know, to do. I mean, from times immemorial, you know, for example, from Adam Smith to present day, you know, it is believed that if the government can build a bridge where it's needed, it's a valuable investment. So the problem is when the government builds a bridge where it is not needed. You know? So in the first years of Borisov's party in the driving seat, you know, they were building mostly reasonable things. Of course, there were small things, you know, because you use Austrian taxpayers' money or German taxpayers' money, and you build a whatever soccer stadium in a village, you know, where there are no youth. You know, the average age is 70, you know. So there are lots of such things, you know. But they happened on a minor scale. Minor scale means 250 million a year. There is a calculation about this, which is not totally wasted. You know, somebody gets paid and that sort of stuff.
In some aspect, Mr. Borisov
but
has
overseen.
You know,
the infrastructure was reasonably built. Bulgaria is not the largest user of EU funding, regional development and infrastructure, that sort of stuff. The largest user is probably Poland, then comes Hungary. Bulgaria basically, you know, is probably fourth or sixth, I don't know. So, and part of it was built by Bulgarian taxpayers' money. For one very simple reason, the cash was there because of the currency board and because of the flat tax. Between 98 and 2009, Bulgarian government had always been at 2% plus as revenue compared to GDP. Most of the countries were negative, but in fact, Bulgaria has been on average 2% plus all the time, with a balanced budget and that sort of stuff. So then there was a deficit year in 2009, and since 2010 until today, Bulgarian government budget is balanced or in the framework of the Stability Pact. So last year, the 2020, the deficit, Bulgaria was the only country with a deficit in the framework of the 3% rule.
Congratulations. It's a big achievement. But let me ask you,
and
Professor.
This year is the same.
Let me ask you, Professor, because many of the international people who will watch this, and also me, when I was 25 years ago, the first time in Bulgaria, there was also still a lot of donkey carriages. Yeah. And just can you describe shortly, does Bulgaria have modern European infrastructure today? And what's the kind of level of investment today in public infrastructure?
I'm not happy with this, but it's much better than it used to be. Yeah. No. I mean, there is only a small chunk of about 40 kilometers to be built, and then Bulgaria will be linked, to entire region and Europe, with highways.
Everything is finished. Only 40 kilometers are missing.
Yeah.
Oh wow, amazing.
This is between Sofia and the Serbian border.
Okay.
Some things are coming from the past. For example, Bulgaria doesn't have a good road to Macedonia, irrespectively how important is the country. It doesn't have a pipeline or something, to Macedonia. So, for example, even Russian gas to Macedonia goes via Greece, and there is no railway. Although the project is there from, I think, 1941. So some other things are also important in terms of infrastructure. The fast track during the Kosovo crisis was to build a second bridge on Danube between Bulgaria and Romania. That project is used to be 120 years old. It did not happen to be very useful because you have a nice bridge, but on the bottlenecks on the Bulgarian and Romanian soil. So there are lots of things, which were not done properly. But this is a very specific topic. We can address it, But what is important thing about Borisov's government is that gradually, but especially after the first mandate, after 2013, these public-private partnerships has been started functioning in a very special way. So the public interest is presented by the government, the private interest is presented by the friends of the government. So, and this led to overall disagreement, with the things the government is running the country, and it led to a very special deterioration of the rule of law in Bulgaria, because the government teamed up with the prosecutor general, and they started redistributing government influence and economic influence, which led to very bad international scores in the area of rule of law for Bulgaria, and not very deep, but negative comments on behalf of the European Union, the Commission in Brussels, and that stuff.
There is kind of rule of law mechanism imposed on Bulgaria, the certification.
It is a recent development. It is a recent development since 2013. When you start distributing the way I explained, the public-private partners, and your private partners are your friends, you need a protection. And if you're a prime minister, where you get protection from? You get it from the prosecution. So you are forced to team up. Otherwise, they will go after you.
Also on Transparency International, it's only at 69 in the global ranking, Bulgaria. That's not very good.
Yeah, that's deterioration. It happened after this thing with the prosecutor chief, was established. I'm not sure it was intentional. It was trial and error. So, but very often, and it was some of the speeches in the European Parliament, they claimed that mafia had conquered the government. It's rather the opposite. This is the government-sponsored racketeering, which is the reality in Bulgaria now. It's not good.
Many of the international friends.
This is not done on a large scale. It's okay, to do it, at the level of 1% of GDP or 2% of GDP, and the rest. This is like the stationary bandit metaphor in economics.
Many of the international friends and allies of Bulgaria, they wish Bulgaria to be even more successful. And the last years, there is not the big progress, and there is also protests. And can you explain exactly what's the nature of these protests and why there is not more reforms happening recently in the last 5 years?
Without understanding what how the government machinery started working, in the last 7 years, people felt that it is not just, and they were protesting about the so-called Borisov's model, which is what I explained. So, of course, they have different names for it. They call it Borisov's model. They have it. They call it corruption. This is not corruption. This is more complicated than corruption. And they were asking, but they understand the essence of the problem, and they were asking for a resignation of the prime minister and the resignation of the prosecutor chief. So, because currently the prosecutor chief acts as, I don't know, not as public prosecutor, but as public rumor spreader. He's spreading rumors, for example, he doesn't like Krassen Stanchev, and he appears on the TV and says, Krassen Stanchev is a criminal. So, and everybody stops working with me. Or he will open a case against me and they will block my bank accounts and I cannot do anything. If I'm a foreigner, I will go to the ambassador and claim, listen, here's something which is not right. So if I'm a Bulgarian businessman, what I would do? I simply go bankrupt. Or there is this is a real life story. Or there is an enterprise, for example, with vineyards. And vineyards, they receive, these agriculture subsidies from the Common Agriculture Policy. So, and if I become politically active for some reason, and what happens, the local prosecutor would open a case, for example, about taxes of the vineyards. And because there is a case, the subsidy stops. So in 1 year, you are far behind the competition. So in the second year, you basically go bankrupt.
So from economic theory, what is the main problem now of this period? Is it that a kind of personalization of the political system, of the justice system, the abused for personal vendettas and for personal benefits? Can you describe it like this? And what really needs to be done from the European level to help Bulgaria to move to the next level of prosperity?
The key problem is misrule of law with the help of the prosecutor chief. So what the European Union can do, it destroys the entire civic process, and the entire credibility of contracts and that sort of stuff, although it is done on a very small segment of the economy. So the impact of the economy is just negative in long term, which basically means that there is no foreign direct investment. There is no access to foreign savings. And if people are trying to use their local savings and invest in the country, they will think twice. So the investment rate is very low, be it foreign, be it local. And this is not because of the COVID, this is not because of the cycle, this is not because of anything else. So because, for example, the foreign investment is about 30 times smaller than in 2008. So those enterprises which were created prior to 2008, they still operate and they have about 35% of the investment of the annual fixed capital formation in Bulgaria. Those foreign investment which happened, 10 years ago. So what is now the situation is that I mean, for the last 10 years, for the last 7 years, remittances are twice higher than the foreign investment. And Bulgaria is not very large with the remittances, so it's not like Kosovo, Macedonia, or Georgia. So where remittances are about 6, 7, 8% of GDP. Bulgarian remittances are about 2 to 3% of GDP, but their volume is twice more than the foreign direct investment, which basically means that no foreigner trusts the rule of law in the country.
So basically, the politician, this phenomenon internationally is quite famous because Mr. Navalny, he made a video about Mr. Chaika. Maybe you have seen it, about the Russian prosecutor general who abuses the judiciary system for his personal benefits. It's a very famous video.
Yes, and he was a major advisor to the Bulgarian prosecutor chief. They were friends. Yeah. It was publicly announced that Mr. Chaika comes to Sofia to advise, Bulgarian prosecutor chief. And
That's not a very good advice.
Chief was very proud of it.
NATO country. Mr. Chaika in Sofia.
Yes.
It's terrible. But
No,
that's
no,
really...
this is no accident that the rule of law area is not a common knowledge. So that to have about 4 months protests requiring, the resignation of the prosecutor chief is something, this is not about simple things. So this was 4 months in a row.
Do you think that the establishment of a European prosecutor office, which is now the reality on the EU level, it will have some impact and improve the rule of law?
No. The role of the European prosecutor, is to investigate embezzlement of European taxpayers' money. So Bulgaria is not very prominent here. So the worst is Hungary. The embezzlement, proven embezzlement, is about 5% of the total assets they were receiving from the European Union. Bulgaria is 2.5 times smaller embezzlement than the European Union. And if you take the money, it is about 50 million in Bulgaria. So the huge embezzlement, the Bulgarian, there were several cases, one of them was actually very large. It was about at least 4% of GDP in 2014. There was a run on a bank in which the prosecutor general, had a major role.
No.
Yeah. By simply announcing to the public that the bank is not good.
Believe such a responsible behavior.
Yeah, it was mentioned. There is a publication in Financial Times which went into these cases. RF Europe published a very good report on this. I published it in forliberty.eu in 2014 about this. So it's well known.
So this copying of the Russian Chaika model in Bulgaria is basically the biggest current challenge. Absolutely, you would say it like this?
Yes. Yeah.
So, Professor, let me ask you about the relation with Bulgaria and Russia, because it's ultimately very much about this, I understand. In 2014, there was the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And where was actually Bulgaria positioning itself? And where was the policy line of Bulgaria during the 2014 crisis to now? And how did it affect Bulgaria with its close links to Russia, energy-wise, and what can be done about it?
Bulgaria now is officially against the annexation of Crimea. There was never some sort of a doubt expressed, except for private interviews and except for the incumbent president of Bulgaria, who basically mentioned several times on NATO summits and in other international fora that we, meaning NATO, should try to understand, Russia. That's the what does it mean? I don't know. I know what does it mean. So, but trying to understand Russia, meaning that they want to have a right to operate as they wish, not obeying the international law. I mean, I understand this, but there are many idiots around, who like to not to obey the international law. So that's so Bulgaria was always in the camp with all the European and NATO member states. At the same time, and then the president of Bulgaria in 2014, Rosen Plevneliev, he was openly criticizing Putin and Russia on all the international fora. He took the initiative of a joint defense effort in the Black Sea, and he organized. The problem was that in 2015, after the annexation, after the military buildup in Sevastopol and Crimea, the Russian fleet of the Black Sea was already 7 times larger than the combined fleet of all other countries. So, which led to an initiative by President Plevneliev to join the naval forces of the NATO countries and NATO partnership, which basically means everyone in the Black Sea, and have some sort of a joint shield, in the sea. So what happened then? 1 week before. 1 week before the final negotiations, before the formalization of the agreements, which were taking place. So the Prime Minister of Bulgaria appeared on the TV and said, okay, in the Black Sea, let's make love, not war.
So he's with Putin?
So,
Borisov? Borisov
it's Borisov.
He's with us.
And the entire process was blocked immediately.
So Russia is behind it?
Yes. I have no doubts.
That's very bad.
So, and it's one thing, to be in favor of sanctions, and basically, have a rhetoric, this is not good, they must obey the law. And another thing is to provide for. Of course, he's flexible. The guy is flexible. Now he's in favor of such a shield, although it's already late, in my point of view. I mean, the exercises in Crimea and in the Black Sea basically shows that the cooperation between NATO and partnership countries in the Black Sea is already late.
And the Prime Minister
Romania has a radar system, which basically defends Bulgaria.
And does Bulgaria support Ukrainian NATO and EU membership?
As a rhetoric, yes. I'm a great fan of it. I was on Maidan myself, trying to help as much as I could.
Yourself on Maidan, Professor.
Yeah.
Very good, excellent.
Of course, it was for 2 days.
So, Bulgaria, but it's a good thing of solidarity or friendship with Ukraine.
May I show something I prepared? There are 2 slides.
Please, please.
I think it is not possible.
I'm not sure. How
I'm disabled. I cannot share the screen.
I don't know exactly how I can do that. But Professor, let me ask.
I can explain.
Yes, if I'm happy.
So I compared Czech Republic and Bulgaria, the GDP numbers. So Czech Republic and Bulgaria were different at the very beginning. If you take early 80s of the last century. So the Czech GDP was about $20 billion. Bulgarian GDP in the early 1981 was about $15 billion. So then Czech GDP did not decline in the beginning of the 90s. Bulgarian GDP declined in the beginning of the 90s and then in the middle of the 90s and went down to $10,000 billion. At the time, $10,000 billion volume of GDP in current prices. Oh, the Czech Republic was already 40,000, 4 times bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Bulgaria is 7 times bigger than in 98. So it was 10,000 in 97. So now it is $72,000. So it's 7 times bigger. But the Czech Republic is already 240,000 billion. So
what a difference. Good reforms, man.
This is the cost. This is the cost of stupidities and political rollbacking to central planning at the beginning of the 90s. And this shows the picture of this, allows for a comparison with Belarus, with Ukraine. So if you let the country go, you know, it will be rather behaving like Poland or like Czech Republic. Mm-hmm. If you stick to central planning ways of running the country, you will have, you know, a very meager performance in the economic area. Another thing I was surprised. I'm not sure whether that's the correct term. I was surprised to discover is comparing Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, Russia, and Bulgaria life expectancy. And what I saw is that most Central European countries, Romania as well, are more important in terms of comparison because at the end of the World War II, the life expectancy was basically the same as Austria or Germany. A couple of years longer life expectancy in, excluding, of course, wars and violent, whatever, deaths. So then it was going relatively in parallel until 59, 60. But of course, you know, with some advantage in Germany and Austria for many reasons, you know, whether it's probably income. And wealthy is unhealthy, okay? So, and then in the 60s, the life expectancy stopped developing in our countries, in all of our countries. In Soviet Union, it was declining all the time. Small declines, falsified statistics and that sort of stuff. But in our countries, it became flat. And it stayed flat until 1990. And then from 1991, in all our countries, the life expectancy went up. Only in Bulgaria, it fell down to the level of the 60s in 96, 97. And now it's again catching up. So this is a very interesting fact. And I would advise everybody who is interested in the history of our countries to look at statistics of like life expectancy for our countries. This is just amazing, you know, to see the line of the graphs, you know, how it goes.
Professor, about Ukraine, because you were also active in Ukraine, would you recommend the Bulgarian economic reform model of a currency peg and flat tax 10% also for Ukraine? Yes, I tried my best. I was working 2 years ago assessing, you know, the EU and USAID, and not only programs in the of business development, business environment, and I was asked by friends in Ukraine. Then it was some sort of a consensus matter. Everybody in Ukraine believed, you know, that there is a need for a tax reform to make it flatter and to allow for better regulation on investment.
basically freeing the investment, from taxes, which is a normal practice. But the IMF was against, and I believe it is still against, because a month ago I received from a friend in Kiev, I received a request to think of who can be used to talk to IMF vis-a-vis Ukraine, and allowing them to experiment, with flatter and simpler taxation.
You would be the perfect man for that, Professor.
The currency board is another thing. So, hryvnia, I mean, the mood in 2014, before the Crimea annexation, we were in Kiev with Ivan Miklos, Einas Repas, Lithuanian finance minister and deputy prime minister, Warren Coates, whom I mentioned as a head of the team, to create Bulgarian Central Bank, the Bosnian. He was responsible for the creation of the Afghan Central Bank. So also he knew how normal countries operate, because he was Cayman Island monetary authority. So that he came to Kiev and said, you have several options. Number one is floating exchange rate. Number two is inflation targeting, which is not recommended because it was not done well, for the time being. You didn't do it, for 20 years. There's no reason that you expect that you will do it correctly. And the third and probably most reasonable thing to do is to fix the exchange rate and introduce, like in Bulgaria, a currency board system. And then the then newly appointed governor of the Ukrainian Central Bank jumped on the podium and said, oh, no. These were the former idiots. They were not calculating the inflation targeting as needed. Now we will calculate. And they still calculate. They don't allow even the IMF to calculate instead of them because they're very proud.
Arrogance.
It's a very messy. So the foreign ownership in Ukrainian banking system is about 40%. Ukraine is the highest rate, has the highest rate of government ownership in banks. I mean, excluding, of course, Belarus. So with 60% of the assets in state-owned assets in the banking system, I mean, everybody tries to be with the privilege with the government and have a breakfast with the president. So the same is Belarus, but the government presence in the banking system of Belarus is only 50%, not 60%. So,
Professor, Bulgaria was very successful as a member of the Central European Free Trade Agreement until it joined the European Union and was upgraded. And the Central European Free Trade Agreement is now for the Balkans and Moldova. And my question is, do you recommend for Ukraine and for Georgia to join CEFTA?
Yes, I even tried to do some lobbying on the matter during the Bulgarian presidency of the European Union 2 years ago. What I received as a feedback from the Trade Commissioner, from Bulgarian Foreign Affairs Minister, from different commissioners, I used the fact, that they were coming to Sofia, and I know some of them, to talk to them. They explained that they would be eager to advise Ukraine to do so, but they understand that Ukraine is not thinking even of joining CEFTA because of the Kosovo issue. They disagree with the recognition of Kosovo. They believe it's an important matter for Ukraine. So, and now obviously it's very important because of the war in the East and the annexation of Crimea.
Yeah,
But
it would,
I still believe that they can become observer.
it would be good to integrate Ukraine, to repeat the Bulgarian success model in Southeastern European integration.
Yeah, yeah. I think another thing which needs to be done, and this is more on behalf of the European Union. Currently, about 16% of the turnover between Ukraine and I must check, of course. These are data for the year before last. About 16% of the turnover between European Union and Ukraine is subject to tariff. So if I were in the shoes of Mrs. von der Leyen, I would opt for unilateral trade liberalization with Ukraine. It's very important. So it's absolutely important, which does not necessarily mean that the standards will be damaged. So the standards, including human security, food security, everything is there. So non-tariff barriers are there. So why are the tariffs there? I don't know. Because in fact, where the Balkans gained in terms of economic development, it was before they joined CEFTA, they enjoyed a unilateral trade liberalization on behalf of the European Union. And this was a thing advocated, by on a private, it was a private initiative, private diplomacy actually. There were 3 individuals who, we were sort of like 15, 20 talking, making analysis and that sort of stuff, but there were 3 individuals, Patrick Messerlin, who was then a chief economic advisor of WTO and professor from the Sorbonne, Vlado Gligorov, a son of the President Gligorov, working for the Vienna Institute for International Wirtschaftsvergleiche, and Mary Kaldor, who was a professor in London School of Economics. They went cabinet after cabinet, OECD, European Union, and they were talking, to responsible commissioners just to consider what will happen, because we had all the analysis, and eventually it happened. Serbia joined later after Milosevic, but of course, there is a separate free trade agreement with Kosovo. And Kosovo and Macedonia, they have some privileges even, they have the right to impose tariffs on imports, from the European Union. And the original idea was that you liberalize everything but 5% of the turnover. So that was the design. The design was done by Patrick. So when it came to the phase of implementation, it was already 4%, with the agreement that the countries will try to eliminate, another 2% and will liberalize the trade, at the level of 98%. On the 30th, it was already full liberalization, besides some fish produced in Croatia.
Professor, let me ask you, because the EU has a customs union with Turkey since 1995, and you are a neighboring country. How is the effect of that customs union? Do you support the upgrade of that customs union? And do you think Ukraine could have a similar customs union with the European Union?
Yes, even better. Even better, because Turkey has some protection, which is not even in the framework of the agreement with to have a union. For example, automotive industries and construction. Ukraine will not have that. So, for example, their airline builder aircraft builder. They are already in cooperation with Airbus and Boeing, so they're doing well. So there is no issue there. So the Ukrainians, I don't think they have anything to protect.
So a customs union would be the best way to conclude with Ukraine in the short term.
Yeah, yeah.
About your relation with Turkey, and do you support EU membership of Turkey, or do you think it's a privileged partnership and the upgrade of the customs union and possibly a currency peg of the Turkish lira, some kind of economic partnership with Turkey? What is your preferred option?
I do support Turkey's membership. I believe it will be very beneficial for the Union, mostly because it will eradicate most of the European Union programs. Because it's a big country, and if you go, for agriculture policy or regional development or whatever, no, it should be abolished. Otherwise, it won't work.
Some reduction is certainly needed. Professor, about the currency peg of the Turkish lira, is that a good idea, or we should not do that?
No, they should do it. They shall do it. They shall do it, but they cannot finance a couple of projects, including Bosphorus.
Mm-hmm.
These the public-private partnership there works through the central bank, not through the prosecutor chief.
Oh, this
Erdogan is changing the governor of the central bank every second year.
Mm. It's a lot of instability. It must be difficult also for Bulgaria in trade with Turkey.
Sorry?
It must be difficult, the trade relations with Turkey, when they have all these complicated exchange rates and all this currency instability. Or how is the trade with Turkey? Is a lot going on?
Oh, no, there is no problem. I mean, the accounting unit, is either euro or dollar.
Mm-hmm, good.
So who is hit? These are the Turkish exporters, actually, so Turkish importers, not the exporters.
Let me say also thanks that you recognized Kosovo. Bulgaria is a friend of Kosovo, but let me ask you about your trade relations with Serbia. How is the situation with Serbia, which is so much pivoting to Russia in this current conflict and has a free trade agreement with Russia? What's the relation politically and economically with Serbia?
Actually, when Serbia signed a free trade agreement, Montenegro as well, by the way, a free trade agreement with Russia, the trade with Russia declined. So there is no, if you look at the statistics, they have investment in the oil infrastructure, in roads, and but that's it. They have many other things, but retail, the gasoline retail is almost totally owned by Russian companies, but they compete between themselves, and it's good. So there is no problem with that. And
so trade relation with Serbia?
Gasoline. Sorry?
The trade relation?
Bulgaria, Serbia? No problem whatsoever.
The energy cooperation?
Energy.
In the pipelines?
So actually, there is a South Stream, which is a copy of the Nord Stream, but very different. So in the Nord Stream, all the risk is beared by Gazprom, by the supplier. The payment, the final cash, goes to Gazprom Switzerland. So it's very good, for the friends of Gazprom. And but it's also very good for Rurgas and all the owners of the infrastructure on the German soil, for example.
And
because
Austrian, I guess.
They don't have in the contract. They don't have a take or pay clause, and they don't have an obligation to push the transit. So which are the two key clauses in the contract in the South Stream, the so-called Balkan Stream or Turkish Stream, you name it. It's not already Turkish because it was blocked by President Trump. So who basically promoted that and paid for that is Bulgarian taxpayers under the leadership of Borisov. We've paid almost 3% of GDP last year during the pandemic crisis and recession, to Gazprom to build the pipeline.
No, so much.
Of which there is a take or pay clause. And the revenue from the pipeline, they would come according to the plan. They would come 17 years from now.
17 years.
Yes.
So it's not a good project.
Optimistic assessment.
So you're not supporting this pipeline?
No. All the experts. I mean, I'm not a specialist on this, but all the experts in the country, they had assessed these prospects, as soon as the project was announced, like 5 years ago. The calculations were absolutely clear.
So there's also this talk that Mr. Vučić is like the grandson of Tito, balancing the East and the West. But it seems Mr. Borisov is also very much in this Tito as kind of balancing act, quite good.
In fact, he made a good service to Mr. Vučić, because the pipeline, to go to Serbia should cross Bulgaria.
Complicated.
And now Serbia is in position of Bulgaria before joining the European Union. They are very much attractive for foreign investment, and a gas pipeline, would do a very good job for Serbia. Not so much Bulgaria, because there is no, on the way of the pipeline, there is there is one enterprise, which would have benefit or can benefit, from the pipeline.
So Serbia wants to join the European Union very fast. President Vučić said 2024 he would like to be inside, but they don't want to join NATO. How you see that, and how you assess that from the Bulgarian view? You want them to join NATO as well?
In my point of view, the problem is that should first recognize, all the rights of Kosovo, and then, it would allow them, besides the memories and other things, they would allow them, to be active in the partnership agreement. And when they're in the partnership, I wouldn't think, of them as something sort of strange. With the EU membership of Serbia, I think the major problem, I didn't look at this. The major problem is Chinese investment. So I don't know how it happens. If the Chinese investment in Serbia is happening like in Africa, so it's a debt equity conversion of the Chinese through public funds to public borrowing, in Serbia, that's not good. So if it is like Chinese investment in Warsaw, for example, if the government of Serbia announces a global tender, the Chinese win it, that's okay. So, but I'm not sure.
Serbia has developed its currency, the dinar, the Serbian dinar, since the great financial crisis. About 100% has lost the value. And it's one of the few currencies in the Balkans which is not pegged to the euro. What do you recommend to Serbia, to peg the currency to the euro as well?
Currency board.
Absolutely.
Currency board and creation of a digital dinar. In order to, to block the opportunity of the central bank, to manipulate the savings and that sort of stuff. So
Let me ask you about Romania, because Romania, contrary that it was not invited to the EMR2 up to now. And what is the situation of Romania's Eurozone accession? Would you support it? Is it necessary? Should they do it fast or should they continue to delay? And what's the effect on the Bulgarian economy?
They were thinking several times of managing their monetary policies as if it is a currency board without creation of a currency board. But then the philosophy for some reason changed, and they decided that they will opt, for inflation targeting or some sort of classic central banking. 2 weeks ago, they said that 8 years from now, in 2008, they would consider joining the Eurozone, which basically means that 3 years from now, they may send a letter to ECB to join the ERM2.
So only in 2028.
I don't know what is the debate there.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what is the debate there. My major problem is not so much the countries on the periphery of the European Union, or those like Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Romania, Denmark, and Sweden, who doesn't have the euro. My problem is the euro, the ECB. The ECB is not the bank we used to have prior to the Greek crisis, and in the last 2 years, basically since the beginning of 2018, there is a fundamental change in the manner of ECB operations, which has nothing in common with Bundesbank or Austrian Central Bank after the World War II. So they're not concerned so much with price stability, they're concerned with climate change, bailing outs, and that sort of stuff. Supporting competitive industries. What does it mean? I don't know.
It's a bit too much climate change for Mrs. Lagarde recently. Yes. I tweet every week, I tweet her that this is not a part of her mission, but she is somehow determined.
Then the borrowing, whatever the credit line to support different economies is very much telling. So Germany has 25% of the total. It's almost 1.2 trillion euro credit line. So Germany has about 25%. Italy has and France has 22. Italy has 21. So you basically support, irresponsible behavior, looking at this.
That certainly has to change. Professor, let me ask you, when will actually Bulgaria roll out euros then instead of the lei? When will the physical transformation be happening?
The plan is 1st of January 2024.
24. So in the next European Parliament election, the Bulgarians will already vote with and have euros in their hands.
Yeah.
You think that will be realized?
If I was in the shoes of the governor of the Central Bank of Bulgaria, I would have delayed this.
Okay,
I
why?
will wait for the Eurozone to come to the standard of Bulgarian Central Bank.
Good, that's more difficult topic. Yeah, Professor, let me also ask you a little bit about the current economic situation of Bulgaria, because I checked the Doing Business report of the World Bank, and I saw some quite surprising numbers. You are 61 in the world. That's okay-ish, but it's not really very good, And then in getting electricity,
it's 4 times worse than Macedonia and 10 times worse than Georgia.
Yes, exactly. So I was surprised because you're in NATO, EU, you are packed, you have the flat tax, you are almost perfect in everything. But why in the
but there is no rule of law. Yeah, but there is a problem with the rule of law, which scares everybody else,
I see, for example, starting a company in Bulgaria is 113 of the global level. Why?
Yeah.
That's relatively easy to fix. Look at Macedonia.
Oh, well, actually, we fixed it in Bulgaria. It was relatively okay. We helped Macedonia fixing there, and I was working in Bosnia and Herzegovina on the reform of the business registration.
Mm-hmm.
What happened in Bulgaria? The problem here is how doing business measures this. So, and the measurement, I'm familiar with the detail. The measurement is registering a limited liability company as a foreigner. And what happened recently with foreigners opening a limited liability company is a total mess, because Bulgarian government harmonized the local legislation with the anti-money laundering directive, and it made so complicated opening a bank account for a foreigner that basically nobody is opening bank accounts. It's in the last 2 years. It's absolutely strange. Absolutely strange. I can explain how people go around all this, but
but the idea is to simplify things. The idea is also, I saw 151st in getting electricity in European Bulgaria. What's going on?
This
Austrian company FON who is investing in your country. It should be very easy and everything cool. Why 151?
Because the liberalization of the energy retail market was delayed. It was scheduled to happen on 1st of July 2007. But it was blocked because the government wanted to have the National Electric Company, the state monopoly, as a single buyer. And they needed a single buyer in order to finance Rosatom, a Russian state-owned company, investment in a second nuclear.
No.
They needed a company. Yeah. They delayed the liberalization of the energy market in 2007, and it was liberalized only from the beginning of this year.
10 years, lost years.
And there are also problems with prices, and the mess is going to be even larger if the European Union insists on the carbon tax. It will be the mess.
Professor, because you mentioned Rosatom, but you have no business in Bulgaria with Rosatom, because the Czechs have now kicked out the Rosatom from the Dukovany nuclear power. And what's the status of Rosatom in Bulgaria?
Their project is 31 years old. It has been stopped and opened 4 times for now. It's a cash cow. So they stop, they open, they start investment, then it is stopped again, then it's reopened, and that sort of stuff.
I don't know. They run the nuclear power station in, or they operate it, or
no. They were suppliers of the nuclear technology during the late years of industrialization, which is 70s when I mentioned, and Bulgaria was again heavily indebted to Russia. So in order to pay, they buy a nuclear power station. So it's a Russian technology.
And today,
so major suppliers of fuel, of nuclear fuel. And then there was a project in the end of the 80s to build a second nuclear power station on Danube. And when after Chernobyl, I started studying the issue with the second construction and with the old nuclear power station, which is also on Danube. And I realized that it's a complete whatever nonsense. That was one of the reasons I ran for a seat in the Constitutional Assembly, and why I was a chairman of the Environment Committee. So then we mobilized the entire expertise, and in 91 that project was stopped. But then it was again reopened in 96 by then socialists. Of course, because there was no cash, it was stopped again. So then it was opened in 2002. They signed the contract without clear financing clause in 2006, and then the Rosatom Atom Straw Export, or which is part of Atom, they've built the equipment for one of the reactors. So, and they basically sued the Bulgarian government to pay 2% of GDP, for the equipment, which is not usable at all.
Yeah, but
Now the equipment is rusting,
so
I know this very well. I mean, it's as old as transition in Bulgaria, but there is no transition with that second nuclear power station.
what's your recommendation? What's your call? You want to end nuclear power in Bulgaria, or you want to?
No, that nuclear power station is without any reason. It does not contribute to anything. There is nobody to buy the production of that power station. It's not needed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's impossible to buy. Prices go down.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible to sell, sorry. It's impossible to sell anywhere in the region. It's impossible to sell to Bulgaria. It's totally useless.
So
that's why I say it's like a milking cow, so.
It's more for government and for Russia to make money. Okay, good, I understand. Let me ask you, in doing business from the World Bank, I saw that paying taxes, Bulgaria is at 97 only, but you have the perfect 10% flat tax system. So I was wondering, what's the problem here?
Okay, that's to send a matter of methodology. So this is PricewaterhouseCoopers. I'm very much into the details of the entire. PricewaterhouseCoopers gives a very high weight to the issue of how you argue with the tax authorities. So, and because there is a presumption of innocence for the tax authorities, not for the taxpayers, so this is a very bad score. If you take OECD rating of the tax systems, Bulgaria is one of the best because it's cheap, it's straightforward, and the dispute resolutions are relatively easy and relatively cheap.
Very good topic, Professor. Why is Bulgaria not in OECD, and when will it join?
Because of the flat tax.
No.
So, it was believed that if Bulgaria joins, the government, the government will receive a bad advice not to maintain or not to adopt the depending on the period, we had these discussions.
So it was rejected because of your low and competitive tax system?
So it was believed that OECD will have a negative comment about the flat tax system in Bulgaria.
Very bad.
Which would have been the case, but that was the argument. Currently, Bulgaria is applying, and I think it will become a member.
There's a new Director General from Australia, Matthias Cormann, for OECD. He will start in July, and he is supposed to be a center-right-wing economist. So do you see the chances, and do you see that very beneficial for Bulgaria to join OECD?
I'm not sure to what extent OECD or any international organization can contribute to resolving challenges in front of Bulgaria. And these are first of all, rule of law challenges. So as to other things, like knowing standards of investment, standards of taxation, standards of government services, you name it, even urban standards, they have been developed by OECD. Some of those are really, reasonable. Some of those are hooked on central planning, for example, the urban things, and European Union Regional Development Program. Some of those which are used currently by the incumbent government of Bulgaria, not for the good of the economy, are regulations or instructions on how to handle the government-owned sector. And the recent assessment by OECD is that, the government enterprises in Bulgaria are simply nice, which is counterintuitive. All we read, all we know is just the opposite. Why the OECD comes with such a high assessment of the Bulgarian whatever Bulgarian government sector, we don't know.
Professor, let me ask you about the state-owned companies. I thought you privatized most of them. What kind of state-owned companies are left in Bulgarian hands, in state hands?
The gas monopoly, gas transit monopoly, electric company, which National Electric Company, which has assets at a nuclear power station and about 20 water power stations, and one coal power plant.
And is there any plans of Mr. Borisov to privatize them on the stock market?
The scheme is there.
It's a serious question.
It was the scheme how to do this. The scheme how to do this is there on the table of the government since 2006, and the players on the stock exchange, economists, the power sector, foreign investors in the power sector, they always insisted, of getting rid of this whatever. But if the government sold for selling all this, then they would have the opportunity to sign contracts with Gazprom.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Company. So because the National Electric Company and the gas monopoly, they are now teaming up with Gazprom and Rosatom. They borrow in order to build the pipelines and the nuclear power station. So
that's terrible.
If you sell all this, so you won't have somebody to partner with the Russians.
Oh, that's
I
would
have
be
a
very good not to partner.
I have a special article published in Poland, but it's quite popular. The role of Russian state-owned companies in Bulgarian political and economic landscape.
Yeah, tell me, what is the main projects? What are the main activities? What we have to stop?
Everything is built already, but not the nuclear power station.
So that would be a big target for a European-wide campaign to stop Rosatom to build a nuclear power station in Bulgaria. You think like that?
I don't think it's legally possible to build in the current financial whatever. In the current financial setup of the project, it's impossible to have it on European soil because Euratom, which is part of the European Constitution, comes into force, and all the decisions must be taken by full consensus on the European level of all the member states. I don't see anybody agreeing, what Bulgaria would propose. This is very different, from the nuclear power station built by Rosatom, enlargement in Pech in Hungary.
Hungary, yeah,
because Hungary has been experiencing electricity shortage of between 15 and 25% for 10 years. And that was the reason, to build. Bulgaria has been on the opposite, performance, for the last 20 years, the average surplus of Bulgarian energy, electricity supply, is about 17%. So Bulgaria produces more, and the export is 17%. Probably not everything which is capable to be produced is exported.
There's also a
So
Finnish
on this front, there is to build a second nuclear too. Sorry?
So in Hungary, there is a Rosatom project in Pech.
Yeah.
In Finland, there's one, and Bulgaria wants to be the third one.
Yeah.
That must be stopped.
I mean, I'm not sure Bulgaria. This is a group of government officials.
Okay. So privatization. In Austria, for example, we have sold minority stakes of energy companies. Verbund or
I know.
They are 49% sold at the stock exchange, and it's a kind of a compromise between the left and the right to have some kind of.
I know even who was doing this. I don't remember the names, but I have emails of the person who designed that system in Austria, Hungary. I was talking to the company that they come to Bulgaria in order to work with the National Electric Company, the Minister of Energy, and that sort of stuff to do this. So this was not only me, all the major banks, all the major financial companies, they were talking to the government, for, as I said, since 2006. It's already 14 years. But eventually everybody understood what is the game behind. So they won't privatize all this because they would like to have somebody partnering with Gazprom and Rosatom.
Terrible. Anyhow, Mr. Borisov has really a very mixed record on that one, if we can say at least. Yeah, that's not so good. Let me ask you about Schengen zone, because one of the things where Bulgaria is not still member is a Schengen agreement fully. What's happening on that front, and when do you expect Bulgaria to be full member of Schengen?
So technically there is no problem. In terms of real thing, Bulgaria is not acceptable as a member of Schengen because of the rule of law situation. And this point is made repeatedly and privately by many governments of the European Union, and openly and repeatedly by the government of the Netherlands. Now they basically say, provided you have, this, whatever, you call them red directors, but the same cloud which was somehow related, to export of guns and drugs, during the communist regime, in order to finance friendly regimes in Cuba, Nicaragua, Angola, you name it. So if you have the same crooks over there, so nobody would allow country. So of course they cannot say, these are, not very good individuals, they're criminals and that sort of stuff. So what they say, this is corruption. And this is corruption eventually.
So Mr. Borisov is very famous in 2019 because during the negotiation, who will be the new Commission President and the new Council President, he was asking everybody to join Schengen as a kind of leverage in these negotiations. But he has not succeeded. Yeah. So is he not seriously reforming the rule of law in order to address these issues, in order to lead his country into the Schengen zone?
No, if he reforms the rule of law, he goes to jail.
You think so? Independent judiciary is not his priority. Oh, he's member of the European People's Party. He is a very serious European Prime Minister, and he is supported by Mr. Tusk, who is the president of the European People's Party. So how come that there is no stronger pressure for him to behave according to the European standards in the rule of law? What's your assessment?
What they do, they pretend that they are doing reform. I can go in because it's really important for us here. I was doing myself, the monetary assessment of the role of the prosecutor chief. Currently, other people are doing the same. So it's really very important for the country. But what the government is doing is small, whatever. Okay, so here comes comment, from Brussels or the European Parliament. What the government is doing, they ask the Constitutional Court what they would say about, for example, a prosecutor which can be in an investigative position for the prosecutor vis-a-vis the prosecutor chief. So the Constitutional Court thinks about 6 months, that they can deliver something of the sort. It can be done this way and it can be done the other way. So, then, because the question they ask, is like this. Then they draft a law on reforming the Judiciary Act. They send this to the Venice Commission. It takes them another year, to think and deliver a comment. Of course, they cannot be nasty because it's not polite, to be nasty. So they send something, like fake. So, and then, there is another claim sent to the Constitutional Court, here we got this from the Venice Commission, what you would say. And that's all.
Professor, in Albania, for example, because there is also a big issue with the rule of law of Albania. And then the European Union, in order to give Albania the candidate status, they have insisted on very tough rule of law reforms in Albania. Among them also to have international appointed constitutional judges and so on, and really kind of a very strict supervision of the rule of law system in Albania. Of course, it was very controversial, but I think it had a good effect. Do you think that we need a process?
I'm not sure about the rule of law. Albania in the framework of rule of law is somewhere around Bulgaria, but better in terms of international scores. What is the problem in Albania is the government machinery as fixed in the constitution. This is visible, from all the conflicts they have around elections. And I think, this is because of the government machinery, but I didn't look at the Albanian constitution for the last. So I must check. I cannot answer this.
Heading towards that direction because
of being a member of the Bulgarian constitution, I was following most of the constitutional processes in transition countries, but I admit, in the last 7 or 8 years, I didn't follow this correctly. Close.
I wanted to ask about Bulgaria, because if Bulgaria political elite is not ready for an independent prosecutor general, which is working according to the rule of law, but this has kind of a JICA abuse system, then the only way to improve that is to have a co-decision process about this, or an international appointed attorney general, prosecutor general for Bulgaria. Similar, like we have intervened very heavily in the Greek financial system with the Troika, where they, as you have outlined already, are no longer sovereign in a sense economically, fiscally. And if Bulgaria is not able to manage its rule of law sector seriously, then I think it's time to call for a European appointed prosecutor general in
by the
Bulgaria.
way, with Greece, the key player on behalf of Troika was a friend, Bulgarian, who was a deputy director of the Institute of International Finance. So he was the person behind, the in Greece, so I don't think, the international appointment would ever happen. For the time being, the problem is that Mrs. Kövesi, she announced some casting, from the member states to provide lists of names of prosecutors to be members of the European prosecution. And of 10 Bulgarian candidates, 7 has been turned down.
Doesn't really sound very promising.
so this is because the prosecutor chief, he decided that he will send friends and persons without experience, and it is obviously obvious, and when they look at the names, look at the bios, they basically said, could you explain why you are offering all these 7? We don't understand.
We have a similar problem in Malta, in Slovakia, in Romania, and also in Bulgaria, because the European Union has not a really unified kind of rule of law system like the United States of America have. Yeah? If, for example, Bulgaria will be like Wyoming, and there would be a prosecutor general of Wyoming who is not working, then the FBI or the federal institutions would intervene and remove him from office. Obviously, we cannot do that in Bulgaria, but it's a problem for us in the European Union because we have obviously a significant problem with the rule of law and with disappointments. So what is your recommendation? Do you think we need a federal level?
We are entering.
Or what is the economic theory, political theory to fix this?
I don't think. I mean, there is a current debate about the rule of law situation in Hungary and Poland. If one looks at that debate, it's quite comprehensive, by the way, because there were a couple of constitutional cases in Poland and Hungary which raised the eyebrows around the professional community of economists and what is the current situation is that everything is left to the national authorities or National Supreme Judicial Council, whatever the name. And what happens there is that the countries are trying, to resolve issues with the National Judicial Councils. So, which basically means that autocrats are winning at the moment, and this is happening in Bulgaria. This is happening in Slovakia. This is happening in Poland and in Hungary. I'm not sure about Czech Republic or Czechia. So the problem here is not the EU law, because the values and that sort of stuff, it's pretty clear. So the problem here is the EU law. And because there is nothing about the Supreme Judicial Council, about the administration of the courts, whatever, and judicial systems in a member state, so it's impossible to have any structure on EU level changing anything on the ground in the member states. Whenever you have a country which is aspiring to become a member, you may have a comment. So for a country which is already a member, you cannot have a comment. So Albania, probably it works. For a member state, it won't work.
But if you allow me the comparison with sports, in a bit, it's like this, like you would be a football team and you can appoint your own referee. It's It's in a way what is happening in the member states at the moment, because they appoint their own judicial councils and they then serve their own interests, and they appoint their own
I
prosecutor
agree.
general
I agree.
and they serve their own interests. And the rest of the citizen taxpayers can just applaud.
I I admire very much what Alan Milward said about the European Union about 25 years ago, or 26. He wrote a book, The European Rescue of the Nation State. It's a great book. So basically, what was the idea of Adenauer, Schuman, others, de Gaulle? It was to win elections next time. So for this reason, they kept for themselves, the welfare state and this sort of stuff, and left the economy going, whatever, global, international. So, and appointing people to different posts in the system of the nation state, was very key. So for this reason, it's a great book.
I will read it. Professor, one last question. Do you have hope that President Biden will be stricter when it comes to the rule of law of NATO allies and set some higher standards, and also help the transformation of justice in countries in, let's say, the newer allies, in order to give some political pressure for more rule of law minded politicians? Support them more?
In terms of NATO, I think he's doing a better job, but continuing that he's not claiming that President Trump was not right when asking for great contributions from the member states. So he's basically maintaining this whatever requirement, and he's right, because they have a major role in financing the activities of NATO, providing the manpower, and so on and so forth.
I'm less talking about financial contributions. I'm more talking about the institutional framework of member states, to ask higher standards in the rule of law as well from Bulgaria, or less cooperation with Rosatom. Will the Americans put pressure on Bulgaria in the coming years and to somehow end this balancing act and get the act together in the judiciary and look closer towards Sofia's kind of extravaganza in these two areas?
So if President Biden is successful in sanctioning the companies which build the South Stream, the 32nd stream, this means a direct loss of 2.5% of Bulgarian GDP, because the money has been already paid. So what I read, I didn't discuss this with friends, or for some reason, we didn't discuss this. Although I was in the group, to comment on the nuclear, to comment on the gas pipeline and that sort of stuff. We're sort of a group of Bulgarian experts, from around the globe. Some of them are professional, working, for big oil companies and big gas suppliers. So for some reason we didn't comment on this, probably because of elections and that sort of stuff. So my feeling is officially the US ambassador and US State Department representative, they are a bit concerned, what to do in this situation, because in fact, the money has been paid already in December. So, and if the entire project is put on hold, what's next? So who is to be blamed. They can press for an application of Magnitsky law to Bulgarian citizens. There are already a couple of investigations. Eventually, they will lead to Borisov. So for this reason, all Borisov needs, for the time being, the protection of prosecution here.
So it's circling around. So let me ask you, because the elections were happening now in April, I think it was some weeks ago, and now is a government formation coalition negotiation. What's your guess? What's your most likely scenario for coalition forming in the future? And where you see Bulgaria heading, more to the west or more to the east?
No, it stays where it is. I mean, no.
We want it more to the west. We would like Bulgaria.
Constitutionally, the procedure is very clear. For the time being, the first attempt of the biggest parliamentary faction, that of Borisov's party, their attempt failed. There is a second party, which name is simply not translatable into something foreigners would understand. They will receive a mandate this Monday to form a government. I have the feeling nobody knows, they have no experience, they have never expressed what their plans are. They don't take the floor to comment on any of the current issues. When they're asked, they do not answer. They say, you will see, that sort of stuff. Nobody knows. So I got the feeling that they will try to form a cabinet. But it's very likely that they will fail. If they fail, it goes to a third party at the choice of the president, which won't form cabinet. So on 15th of May, we go for fresh elections. So Borisov stays in power until May 15.
And medium term, you think he will stay in power as well?
Sorry?
Medium term, he will stay in power? Long term?
Medium term. If we go for elections, he might form the next cabinet. Yeah, if we go for elections, because then everybody will be losing. Because they are newcomers. So everybody outside the status quo of the last 10 years, they will be losing. Because they're newcomers and they did not perform and they failed to do anything. So everybody losing. So after the next elections, Borisov's party emerges as a key player.
Professor, let me ask you where you see Bulgaria in 2030 and what's the most important things Bulgarian economics politics need to change in order to be as rich as Central European countries are, to be on the Slovak economic level of output and to reach the Czech Republic, somehow like to be doubling the GDP in the next 10 years. What needs to be done?
Again, the same, liberalization plus rule of law.
So no China.
You've mentioned, the ratings doing business, but this is not only doing business. Bulgaria is deteriorating in terms of freedom of trade index. Bulgaria is deteriorating in property rights index. It's everywhere, and this is not designed, so to say. So it is not manipulated because it's everywhere.
Many people feel your pain because your country has transformed so amazingly, has made this Bulgarian economic miracle, has got everything right in the big macroeconomic things. But unfortunately, the rule of law and this kind of political collusive culture, even
in the last 7 years. In the last 7 years.
In the last 7 years,
from a macroeconomic standpoint, the last 10 years are very different from the previous 10 years. So for example, GDP growth is about 3%. Before it was 6.2. Productivity growth used to be about, for the entire period, about 50%. Now it is 25% for the entire period. So job creation is 3 times slower, although, you know, this is because that's the potential. The unemployment rate currently is 5%, which is below the European Union average, and the employment is 73% point something. So it's close to full employment. But at the same time, this would affect, you know, all the social systems, be it the pensions, be it the healthcare, and that sort of stuff.
So the last 7 years, can you call it the second backsliding period of Bulgarian reform history?
Yeah, but it's in comparative perspective, not compared to Bulgaria itself. You know, Bulgaria is, if Bulgaria compares to itself, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, it's going somehow up. But if you compare, you asked about Czech Republic, for example, or Poland. Well, in 10 years, Bulgaria will be as rich if they go backwards.
I wish Bulgaria to be so successful and rich like Slovakia is today, and to reach the 20,000 level, because now you're $10,000 per GDP, around 20,000 the next level. I think it can be reached by joining the Eurozone, by liberalizing, by privatizing, by open up, and by leaving all this Russian energy pivot. That I think would be really very good, and by reforming the rule of law and this Chaika style control of the judiciary, that would be fantastic.
So there is one difference between Chaika and the Bulgarian prosecutor, and above Chaika there was Putin. You know, above Bulgarian prosecutor there is no one, just God.
That's very bad. Yeah, that's very bad. Now I have to ask you for some positive closing statement, Professor. Because overall, see the positive things where Bulgaria was 30 years ago, and still you have transformed your country in a modern European country. You personally have contributed at all the stages, yeah. And I'm optimistic that also this kind of backsliding can be overcome in the 2020s. And I hope that you will be a driver again of this modernization and of this improvement of Bulgaria for the next level of prosperity.
No, I think the country will not get on the right track again if there is no major crisis. So for the time being, you know, there is no major crisis. So we need another crisis, because Bulgarians learned the hard way, the lessons, you know, they learned, you know, in '97. So they would need a crisis.
I have a better proposal than a crisis. Yeah, we have a crisis. We have the Corona crisis already, and we have let's discuss about that. But I have the proposal. I will send this video to all friends in Washington and in Brussels, yeah, in order to really learn more about Bulgaria, and call Mr. Borisov for account, and also intervene strongly in the rule of law system of a beautiful Bulgaria in order to fully comply with European spirit of the rule of law.
Okay, let's see how it works.
Professor, thanks a lot for all your time. It was a very extensive interview. I want to thank you very much for your time and for your patience, for your leadership, and for everything you did for your beautiful country and your nation, because you contributed more than anybody to this Bulgarian economic miracle. And thanks for talking to Pax Europiana, and thanks for your time, and have a nice weekend.
Okay.
Also, patience.
Thank you for inviting me. Well, we are still a very strong group, and I believe, you know, these people which with similar mindsets, you know, we are trying our best. we have different challenges. You know, there were attempts to dismantle, for example, the currency board. There were attempts to dismantle the tax system. There were attempts to do many other, you know, not very reasonable things. So, of course, we failed on the South Stream and the nuclear power station. More on the South Stream than the nuclear power station, but that's fact of life for the time being.
In the long term, reason and rationality and freedom will win. I'm convinced.
Okay, let's finish
Professor,
here.
thanks a lot for talking to the show and for this interview, and all the best to Bulgaria. And thanks a lot.
All the best to everyone who Pax Europeana. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.